This week, I do have my meat-scented candles keeping me company here in studio. We're going to interview Jeff Tinsley, the CEO of RealMe, to talk about online safety and security as it pertains to dating apps and online marketplaces. Next up, we welcome Gordon Draper, founder and CEO of cybermarket.com, to talk about the democratization and globalization of cybersecurity consulting. In the security news, trust no one. It's all about the information. So many Windows vulnerabilities. So many. Saudi Aramco data for sale. Sequoia, the perfectly named Linux vulnerability. Is Microsoft a national security threat? Pegasus and clickless exploits for iOS. Homoglyph domain takedowns. When DNS configuration goes wrong. And a backdoor in your backdoor. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm not in the studio anymore. I'm back home. But I'd like to introduce you to the best thing that ever came out of the Vietnam era, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 703, recorded on July 22nd, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. I'm the only one here in studio. Well, I have my meat-scented candle seance going on here in studio. Thank you, listeners, for all of the meat-scented candles, some of which I think came from Adrian Sanabria, but that's my theory. Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us remotely. Jeff, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Now, is your background the Gibson from the movie Hackers?
It is what you want it to be.
It looks like the Gibson from the movie.
It does. I should probably never use this background again.
I was waiting for it. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us as well. Lee, welcome. Lee, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
You know, if you unmute your mic, it works a lot better.
It does. It sounds fantastic. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us as well. Tyler,
I still can't believe you got meat to candles.
We got lots of meat-scented candles. I feel like the more we talk about and say meat-scented candles, the more meat-scented candles we're going to receive. And I think it's kind of fun. And they smell really good. I mean, if I'm burning the bacon one, it smells like bacon in here. It's nice. Couple quick announcements to get started. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Jeff Tinsley is the founder and CEO of RealMe, a turnkey no-cost technology solution to protect dating app users and their other online marketplaces. Today he joins us to talk about safety and security online, in online dating apps and online marketplaces. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's fun to be with this fun group, that's for sure.
It's nice to have you, Jeff. Now, are you a security practitioner or information security by trade, by nature? Like, do you get a start in information security or technology in general?
Good question. I've actually been in the internet space for about 20, I don't even know how many, 25 years. I guess I started in 1994. And back then, nobody believed that you need a website. Nobody think that the internet was going to take off the way it did. So I got started building websites, taught myself to develop, set up my own infrastructure with my own, platforms. And I think I had one of the first well, back then, T1 connections going into my mom's house, right?
Nice. That was fast back then, because the other alternative was dial-up, essentially.
Yeah, actually, what was funny was it was Pacific. I'm on the West Coast. Pac Bell was our phone service provider, and they had said they had never set up a T1 in someone's residence before. So yeah, I think I had one of the earliest T1 connections to my house. So yeah, I had to learn kind of everything in terms of infrastructure and application foundation and security related to that, all that stuff. So I'm not, the technologist today, but I definitely had to get my foundation there. Sure.
How did you come to create a company to protect online dating?
That's another good question. So, our business has actually been around for quite a while, but, RealMe has been focused for the last 5 years or so on helping people learn more about others online. But really through our research, we came to find out that just a ton of people are getting hurt out there because more and more people are connecting with strangers. And, our focus is to make the internet safer, because more than people know, and this is why I'm glad to bring this out to your audience. I mean, people are using services to connect with strangers, but we know that most people don't trust the strangers they're going to meet. And what's happening is that people are dealing with a lot of fake people out there. There are a ton of fake profiles, and people are getting scammed. Scams are on the rise. People are, stealing your money, and even, we're seeing a lot of even worse things happening. So we're trying to make an impact there, and we seem to be the only ones that are focused on this critical issue that's happening right now. So I think it's a meaningful area to, invest our time and energy and effort to make less of the internet anonymous in certain contexts, and make sure that people know who they're engaging with to stop some of those major problems that are happening.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Jeff, because de-anonymizing people and being anonymous are synonymous with each other, right? We want to know who the evil people are so we can tell if they're evil or not. But if you're the victim, you may want to go through great lengths to be anonymous online. It's an interesting balance.
Good point. It's interesting what RealMe is actually trying to make all marketplaces safer, basically sites that connect strangers. It happens to be that in a dating context, we actually do some things to make sure that the user is still protecting their privacy and is semi-anonymous, but that at least they're a real person instead of a bot. And you get, you have the ability to learn a little bit more about them before you engage with them. So, you're not going to get taken advantage of in some way. So there's somewhere in the middle, right? But basically what we think is that too much of the internet's anonymous, and there's no accountability, and a lot of bad shit's happening as a result of, of that.
It's interesting. Last week we had Jack Rosider from the Darknet Diaries podcast on the show. And since then he's released an episode, and it was centered around the victim of extortion, essentially. This person was very astute in registering short names on Twitter and Instagram, and became the victim of harassment online, but manifested itself in the real world. I mean, essentially, this person was delivering them pizzas like on a pretty consistent basis, very late into the evening, and not stopping until the intellectual property essentially was transferred to this person. So, I mean, do you deal with that's what some of the things you're trying to prevent, right?
Yeah, I mean, when the internet started, everybody loved that it was anonymous. Anybody could be whoever they want. There was like a cartoon from like the New Yorker or something like that.
The dog.
You guys remember? Some of you might be old enough. I'm old enough, obviously.
Anyone can be a dog on the internet, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So, so it actually caused a lot of problems, right? So, but I think it's probably because not everybody realized that so many important connections and conversations and interactions and transactions were going to happen online, right? So it's like at first it was fun to just be someone other than yourself, but then next thing you know, you're dating online, you're buying and selling online, all kinds of stuff. And people have taken advantage of the fact that most of the internet's anonymous, and there are certain contexts where you probably shouldn't be, right? And people are getting hurt, and that's what it comes down to. A lot of fake profiles, like I said, etc. People are fake. People are taking advantage of people. FTC says as far as scams, romance scams are the single biggest category. They've increased 3x over the last many years in terms of scams, and just in dating sites, right?
And how would you describe rather, Jeff, a romance scam?
Yeah, so I'm going to take from what the FTC has about this and the way that they define it, but it's like what we understand is happening is that you've got a lot of people just totally falsifying identities, claiming to be a real person. Mm-hmm. And what they do is take advantage of the fact that somebody else wants to get into a relationship, right? So they'll tell them anything that they want to hear. And then they come up with scams to basically say, well, I'd love to see you, but I'm stuck in my country and I need you to send money for me to come visit you. Or, right. Oh, I just had a terrible accident and I need your help, where they've already basically tried to take advantage of that person on the other side to make them fall in love and then get them to transfer money, things like that. And it's prevalent. It's the single biggest category of fraud according to the FTC, and it's growing like crazy. And we also found that for what it's worth, and hopefully your listeners are actually going to pay attention to this too, at least give them pause when they're interacting with a stranger. Scams have actually exploded since the pandemic too. Right. That's another thing that we've noticed.
Well, yeah, because you don't want to leave your house, so you're going to commit the crimes from your house even more so than before. Increase that adoption. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way, as increasing fraud, essentially, or an online crime.
Yeah, well, all of us are using these different services that where you connect with people you don't know. Look, all of us have even friends on so-called friends, right? Right. On Facebook or Instagram or whatever. But do you know who these people are? No. Most of the time, a lot of the time you don't. Some of them you do, right? But when you're actually engaging in certain, even those environments can be risky too, right? But then sometimes you're in environments where there's a lot of money on the line, and bottom line is a lot of the statistics around the fact that people are getting tricked. We've got a guy that works for us. I'm not going to name his name, right? But he happens to date online a lot. And this is how crazy the problem is, okay? I asked him the question, it's how often do you get tricked by bots, right? Or it wasn't really put that way. How often do you think you're end up engaging with bots? And one of the most popular services out there, I'll just call him out. Why not? Tinder. He uses Tinder a lot. Mm-hmm. The guy at our company said that basically about 75% of the time, this is just his gut right around it. He said it's a totally fake girl on the other side mm-hmm. that's talking to him. And the conversations are sophisticated. The bots are so sophisticated. They're getting into conversations about life and love and God and the universe and all this kind of shit. And he can't even really tell until pretty far into the conversation that they're mm-hmm. fake, right? And then, these guys that are scammers and such, they're then engaging with you at a certain point. Sometimes a real person takes over to then try to take advantage.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that it worked in a hierarchy like that. The bots are kind of your initial hook, and then at some point a real person takes over. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's all out there, right? Wherever there's an opportunity to take advantage of people are sophisticated around how they're going to do it. And it's a shame, but there's obviously simple solutions around in certain kind of contexts. I mean, we think it's the responsibility of these service providers that are connecting strangers to basically do some simple verification about that the person is real and have some kind of history and access to available to the consumer about who that person is, what they've done in the past, and take the responsibility as a platform to start cutting out the bad actors and be proactive in that respect.
Right. And you and I and most of us on the show and listening know that they don't want that, because that means their total user count goes down and they're not going to get the next big funding round or get acquired, which is a sad reality about the economics that happen in tech today. But would you agree that's probably the number one reason?
You know what? I think that's a really astute observation and probably hypothesis and right, and it's right. I mean, like it appears that about 50% of the profiles out there are fake. I mean, it does vary between site because some services, just still focusing on dating, do more than others around verifying their users and cutting out the bad actors. But we think from we've modeled some of this out. We think at the end of the day, there's a low level of trust in these environments. 85% of the people out there, at least in the United States, that are using a variety of services, dating or any other buying and selling services, are not trusting the other people that they're going to engage with. And so with that low level of trust, it's like, look, a simple solution for the services is to verify the users, make the consumers feel safer and actually make them safer. And you're going to have a more sustainable business, because the other thing we learned through a nationwide study is that if the consumers feel safe and it is a safer environment, they're going to use those safer environments more than alternatives. And it's a big problem out there. And maybe short term, a company could, if they have a lot of bots, could be affected in terms of activity on the service. But if you really care, it's a responsibility we feel of the service providers to make their customers safe. And it's going to be better for business in the long run. You're going to beat out the other guys that are actually just that just don't care that bots are taking over your environment.
But I think privacy laws and regulations could also come into play, where the providers don't want to store or collect in any capacity personally identifiable information about their customers, because then they can be held liable. Certainly GDPR and other in California. Is that also one reason why they're not basically giving consumers like a validation check, because they need to store this personal data or at least handle it?
Well, I mean, there's nothing illegal about asking a user to give you some basic information about who they are, right? And that cuts across a lot of fields. I mean, I know there are more restrictions when you're getting into asking for things like social security number, but some of the basics are a good idea to collect, first name, last name, age, and zip, whether you're showing it on your site to the other users or not, and use that as a simple, there various, layers of being able to provide authentication on the user. A simple one is just asking for that, checking to make sure, using a service like RealMe to check and make sure that that person does even really exist, and then being able to give the consumer the ability to know more about who that person is and their behaviors in the past and on other sites, so that they can make an informed decision about who they're going to engage with, right? So there are lightweight ways to do it, which are, without, there are no legal issues around doing anything like this, of course. It's like, we've got to follow the law. We're compliant with the various laws out there, of course, related to these kinds of things. And
right.
I think people are some of the platforms themselves, dating sites and others, are just starting to realize that there are easy ways to do these things, and that it's going to be good for their users.
Jeff, how does your service work? Does it do I give you like an online profile from a service, and then you report back a score of like 1 to 10? This account's a bot or not, or reputation score?
Well, the simple kind of integrations that we have with some of the dating guys out there, they're passing over some information which is protected and encrypted about who the user is that they have, and we're able to verify that it's actually a real individual in the United States, right? And then for the consumer, they're able to simply see that, hey, this guy, when I'm looking at their profile, I know that they're real. And then if I want to learn more about them, I can click through and learn a bit more about them, to make a good choice about whether I'm going to engage with them. And part of our whole kind of model looking out is that the network of participants are all feeding back in information about who the good and the bad actors are, so that every other, marketplace or dating site that's part of the network is actually benefiting from the collection of the centralized information about those behaviors. Mm-hmm. So long story short, it's like, as more and more services participate and integrate RealMe, which is really easy, the service and the ability to secure, to protect the consumers only gets better.
Mm. So your play is a B2B play with the providers, not necessarily with the individual?
Well, it's really a B2B2C. So our objective at the end of the day is to make these dating sites and marketplaces that connect strangers safer, right? And make them more trusted. But when these services do integrate us, it's the consumers that are really benefiting, so they can see who's real and so they can learn more about the other folks. So it's really a B2B2C model. Our platform is working with the companies that reach a lot of consumers that they can help.
Sorry, Jeff, Lee, did you guys have questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, are you having any trouble with scaling? I mean, it seems like these sites are pretty active and you'd be like struggling to keep up.
Struggling to keep up as far as scalability?
Yeah,
of the
in terms of volume.
No, fortunately, we've been around for a while, and
Jeff launched his first site on a T1. You know about scalability.
Oh my God, I have to tell you. Well, as a side note, it's like before I got the T1, I was hosting websites on a 28.8 dial-up connection.
Wow.
So I had a static IP, dialed into my local ISP. And then I use dynamic routing. I can't even remember what some of these terms are anymore. Like, to basically take requests for different domains and funnel them to different kind of experiences in the application. Anyway, I'm going too far there. So yeah, I've been around the block. So yeah, I'm glad we don't have a T1 anymore. We have a little bit better connection than that. And we have a serious infrastructure that we've invested more than $50 million in for this purpose. So yeah. So handling the requests from these different sites that are connecting strangers, it's not a big deal at all, and the lookups are easy and that sort of thing. So what's going in our favor is seriously that I think finally people are starting these services like the dating guys are starting to realize there's a major problem. It's the number one security related concern for dating sites, because we ran a study asking the executives at these dating sites, and it goes beyond dating, but the dating executives said that security for their consumers is the number one issue that they're thinking about. And so everybody's starting to realize they have to do something because too many people are getting hurt, and it's their responsibility, to keep those users safe, and it's good for business at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's good for business, and Ashley Madison was a shining example of what can happen if you don't, protect your users' data. I want to ask you about the verification check, Jeff. Is that, obviously, I don't know if there's secret sauce or not, right? But like, how are you validating that a person is actually who they say they are? We as hackers sometimes will go through great lengths to create fake people to accomplish our missions in an effort to make organizations safer at the end of the day. But how easy is it to fool the system? Like, what are the checks like?
I think that right now the checking is a little bit lightweight for my taste, right? But nevertheless, something's definitely better than nothing. But we're looking at adding a lot of additional capability around, even believe it or not, biometric checks and actual, government issued identity kind of checks on the surface kind of level, tied to other public and government source data, which we already have, to really strengthen kind of that part of our service. So what we have is a little bit lightweight, but we're adding a lot to that. But it's definitely better than what any of these services are doing today.
Right. Jeff.
The other Jeff, that is. I hope.
The other Jeff. Yeah, Jeff man.
I'm curious, as you're collecting this data on behalf of your customers or customers, are you retaining it, or are you just simply getting, scores or reports? I guess my concern is if you start collecting a whole bunch of data on people, you yourself become a target, and you yourself have security concerns and regulatory compliance concerns like GDPR. So what are you doing to address the protection of the data that you're collecting?
No, that's a good question. So we've been around for a while. We like to think that we have a good platform and some pretty good security. But related to the laws and what we're collecting and what we're able to retain, we're really careful about what we're doing in that regard. I'm sure everyone can always do better. I mean, I know some of the biggest services in the world out there have been hacked. So everybody's always at some level of risk. But for the partners, the set of information that we're collecting is actually quite minimal, and we're retaining only what we need to in order to satisfy the consumer to know, like give them a chance to learn more about another person. The other key piece of information we are collecting for the benefit of the network is being able to relate user A on one dating site, let's say, to another user, so that if he's a bad actor and he's only acting poorly in one environment and scamming people, that the other node in the network, the other other company that's using the RealMe platform is beneficiaries of that knowledge. So we try to keep the footprint in terms of the data collection to a minimum, but just doing what we need to satisfy to make the site itself more trusted and make the consumer safer and give them access to what they need to know.
What kind of adoption do you have so far from like just platforms and general users? Is this like taking off? Are you at like a 10% market cap? Like what's the level of adoption you're getting?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is going to happen, we already have a bunch of deals signed that haven't even gone live. We just haven't, a handful of dating sites that are live so far, but again, agreements with a bunch of others. I think pretty much every dating site is going to be incorporating some kind of, verification and access to additional background and historical behavioral data for their consumers within the next year or two. I think it's going to be it's a must-have kind of thing. And we're happy to hear that, top of mind for the executives, at least at the dating companies, is this, like I said, security. The consumers want it. People are getting hurt. They need to do something about it. So what we're starting to see is that we're pretty much talking to every big dating service out there, and so I'm glad that they've all gotten responsible and gotten excited about, and the need to do this for their consumers and for their business. But really, there's so many areas on the internet that need to do the same thing. I mean, you guys think about the services that you use where, like I said, you're connecting with strangers. I mean, you've got whatever, I could just cut them off. You're buying and selling online with strangers all the time, right? eBay's still a huge business. You've got, is it OfferUp or, another marketplace? You got Facebook getting into marketplace kind of business where it's like people are buying and selling with each other. A lot of transactions are going through Venmo where you don't even know who you're sending money to. There are so many places where you're engaging with somebody you just don't know, and it's just not safe. And it's easily kind of addressed. So sky's the limit. Really, we've been focused on the dating space for a bit, and every dating site seems to be moving toward implementing the RealMe platform because nobody else is really doing this.
Is there a premium service where if I'm a user of a dating site, I can get the person's who wants to date me, their credit score and their criminal record? Joking.
Well,
or do you check that? I mean, do you check that kind of? I mean, there's a lot of privacy, implications here, but some of the data is pertinent to the marketplaces and or dating sites that you're using. Certainly a credit check, perhaps with someone I'm going to do a financial transaction with. Maybe I don't need to know their credit score, Jeff, right? But is it a thumbs up, thumbs down, from a credit perspective? Have you considered stuff like that?
We should have you as an advisor. I think you're right on target with all this stuff. So, part of what we do is
I only take a small percentage of equity to be an advisor, Jeff. Let's talk.
Paul, you're right on target. It's everybody that's using these kinds of, at least dating service, focusing in on that for a second, they try to go and check out who the other person is, right? It's just not always easy.
Well, for us in the hacker community, we'll do that and rely on each other to do that, and we'll do that for friends, right? But that we'll only get so far with this number of people with that skill set, right? Even if we're Tyler certainly is a shining example. Someone's happy to do that for people, right? But we're only going to get so far.
Right. No, you're right on. It's not easy still, right? I mean, before we started doing what we're doing, it wasn't easy for people to go and really check out any individual. You have to do a lot of work, right? So some of the hard work we've done is actually aggregating the information from a variety of sources right, for the purpose of being able to validate identities and be able to know more about them. So we actually do give in the dating context on a site. You're on Tinder. You're looking at someone that you're really interested in. You want to learn more about them. Some of the information that we are able to share with you so you can make sure you're dealing with a real person, know more about them, is some of the background information. We don't have credit information, though that I think you're probably right, Paul. To some people, that's actually important also.
Right.
I think,
but I think important, Jeff, in the context, like, I don't know if you serve a marketplace. I mean, Angie's List was one of those kind of .com-ish startups, right? I think I'd love the modern Angie's List today, because it's really hard to find good contractors to do work on your home. Specifically, I'm going to use that as an example. And I think there, a credit check, but also a better business bureau check. Like, is this a reputable business? Yelp is like a crowdsourced thing that I'm sure you looked at Yelp and was like, I can do better than Yelp for dating sites and marketplaces, right? But I think this can be applied to different markets to make sure I'm doing business with someone that has a good reputation at the end of the day.
You're totally right? And like the kind of the crazy, scary example that people talk about out there, and as far as marketplaces more generally concerned, is like Craigslist. I mean, how many stories have all of us read about people that put something up for sale, a stranger comes over to their house, or the other thing that goes on is people put stuff up for sale, they're not even real, right? And they're trying to scam you. I just recently heard about, and I guess it's pretty prevalent, people putting puppies up for sale. Have you guys read about this?
Yeah, because there's a huge demand, because everyone was home during the pandemic, so everyone went out and got a dog, and now there's a shortage on getting especially certain breeds of dogs.
Right. So everybody wanted a puppy. You're right. Like, and they're putting them for thousands of dollars. They get you to send money in advance, and then you're screwed. Or even worse, they're getting you to send some Bitcoin or something like that. So it's getting worse and worse and worse, frankly, So that's what we're trying to stop with RealMe.
So what about the dating sites where people want to be semi-anonymous? Like, there are some of these that kind of hinge on the anonymity.
Really, Tyler? Which sites are these, Tyler?
I have no. You're asking the wrong guy here.
There's a balancing act there, because even with what we do for the dating sites, we're not showing someone's first and last name. We're not showing where they live or anything like that. What we're doing is when you find Tanya on Tinder, right, we're helping you know that Tanya is actually a real person. Then you're able to learn more about Tanya, but not. Yeah,
but I think the next step from that, Jeff, I want to know if Tanya's married or not. Right? I mean, that's to Tyler's point. Like, that's a pretty good piece of data in this situation.
And can I pay extra to know that?
Right.
Yeah, that is part of the whole thing. It's like we're trying to help you learn more about this person. I mean, even helping you know like what they post in social media environments and such. Are they married? Going beyond like, are they a real person? It's just generally speaking, people want to know more rather than less, and they should.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, essentially what you're coming down to, Jeff, is like, did this person lie in their profile or not? Right?
Oh my gosh, and the lying is prevalent.
Yeah.
Like, I think we have some studies. I don't have the statistics offhand. It's like, first of all, like I shared with you guys, 30 to 50% of the profiles are fake altogether, right, in these dating sites.
So you can't even, it's like whether it is a person that may be lying, or whether it's a person that's just trying to create a fake persona that is or a bot that's creating a fake persona. There are three different things almost.
Right. And we actually found that even if they're a real person, like you said, it's like they're lying about the details about who they are. People lie about their age. People are putting up old pictures.
Yeah.
Right. There are a lot of different issues that are taking place. And one of the things that we found is that for whatever reason, the younger generation lies more. And at the same time, they know each other are lying. So the level of trust is even lower, which makes, the challenge is even greater for the dating sites or any marketplace for that matter. Right. So it's like there's just a low level of trust, and it seems like things are getting worse.
Jeff, do you have a question?
Well, Sort of a question comment. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was just last week, Security and Compliance Weekly, where we did a focused episode on HIPAA and learned again that, only sort of organizations that are directly involved in the healthcare industry and are registered and have a designation as a third party something or other. I kept thinking, a lot of this, checking the accuracy and the efficacy of reported information, this could almost bleed into HIPAA territory. Are they really male? Are they really female? Are they trans? Do we care? Height, weight, hair color? I mean, it again just seems kind of borderline, the kind of information that you're collecting or observing and checking, where it becomes an issue for your company in and of itself, or depending on how much information you share with your customers. I think, Jeff, it seems like it's a fine line to walk in terms of the regulatory.
I agree. Yeah, like Jeff, what do you check and validate versus share? Because that's an important distinction.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, first of all, we're figuring this out over time. Our objective is to make the, consumers safer, make these sites more trusted and not have issues. Some of the basics are around just making sure somebody's real or not. Mm-hmm. In terms of the information that you bring forward, we're bringing forward a lot of just basics right now, and we'll figure out where that line really is. But we're already hiding things that are probably a bit too personal or too private, about a person right now, good or bad. We'll see where the market goes here, but like the basics are just making sure you're not going to, you're dealing with a real person, you know a little bit more about them. Do they have a history of actually scamming people? Wouldn't you like to know that? That they have a history of scamming people, so you can still choose to move ahead with a transaction. But just like in the real world, if you hear from a friend that this guy's a bad guy, like you're going to consider that. You still might do business with them. You still might engage with them for some reason, because maybe that's okay with you, or they gave you a different impression. But just some of the basics need to be brought forward as far as who they are and what some of their history is, so that you at least are better informed. And even if these guys, there's more and more of these companies do apply, use RealMe or try and cobble together their own kind of thing. It's like it's going to make a dent in terms of the reducing kind of the negative outcomes, right? So bringing more information forward is probably good, and let the consumer make an informed decision there. That's kind of like where we are right now.
And it's different Sorry, Jeff, it is different from a rating system in that RealMe goes to reliable sources to make a determination, whereas you mentioned eBay. And Amazon has a marketplace, right, which is pretty popular because nothing is in stock on Amazon, so I got to buy it from a third party, and they've got these ranking systems. Yelp is a similar thing where it's crowdsourced. But I want to know that someone's done some kind of background check without having to do it every time I make a transaction, right?
Right. Well, it's a little bit of both. I'm sorry, I changed my view because I realized, with my bald head, it's like the background there is just shining off my bald.
You don't look like a deity anymore.
You were glowing. you were very glowing. You have a glowing personality, Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Well, we actually have a little bit of both. We have at the core kind of we've gathered information about individuals from a variety of sources, including public and government sources. But a part of the whole platform allows people to share their experiences with another person, right? Because think about it, in real life, as the example I gave earlier, that's what really happens. I'm going to go out with a friend. I'm getting set up. A friend has perhaps set me up with someone. This is not the case for me, by the way. I'm engaged, but so just for example purposes only. You're probably going to hear a little bit about that person, right? So that is something that we do allow for in the environment. So if you go on a date with someone and maybe you have, not the best experience, you might be able to share that and say what Bill was a gentleman, but there just wasn't a right fit, but I appreciate that he pulled the chair out for me and, was considerate the entire time, and he's a wonderful guy, and somebody else should date him. That's okay, right? Or, obviously things could be a lot worse, but we think getting that feedback from the people that are engaging with the others is actually an important element of what we're doing as part of being able to help you learn more about the people that you're going to engage with.
Yeah, I've got
Jeff.
another question. How much of what you do is sort of predicated on, sort of the people that are signing up to use the service that, want to vet the people they're connecting with, but, how much of it's vetting those people and how much of it has to do with them, filling out certain forms, clicking on opting in, consent to being, going through some sort of background investigation, something like that?
Well, I mean, as more and more of these services adopt a way to make sure that, they're validating the users and helping you learn more about other folks, it's just as important, obviously, in that environment that you manage how you look, right? So if you're going to be a participant, it's critical that you are aware of what's out there about you, what it says about you, what people are saying about you, and manage your public persona, how you're perceived, right? Your reputation, really, at the end of the day, right? It's critical, because if you look, and we do it in the real world, right? I mean, in the morning, we all, well, some of us, I guess, I'm not always dressed like this even, right? We're pretty casual here at work, but when we're going out to meet people, we get dressed up, brush our teeth, right? Try to present ourselves well. And so that's a critically important part of the whole ecosystem. Really, at the end of the day, with accountability, for your actions, really think that at the end of the day, we start driving more positive behavior, right? If there's accessibility to how you act as a person, just like in the real world, but really brought online, it's going to drive more positive, good behavior and less bad behavior, right? Because you're going to get, it's going to affect you. Does that make sense?
Well, we have to be careful, Jeff, that we're not going to all end up on an episode of Black Mirror where everyone's rated based on whether they're a good citizen or not. I don't know if you saw that episode, but
it's where they might be going. No, I mean, but everybody that's using this system, it's a matter of perspective, is the them that somebody else wants to vet. Right?
I don't know if I quite understood that. Everybody that's using the system is going to want to make sure that they look good, or I'm sorry, were you saying something?
If I'm a user and I've never used a dating app, but if I did and I was concerned about the person that I was communicating with and wanted to do the check, whatever, get the rating, get the gold star, whatever it was, I'm interested in using the service either through my provider or directly with you to get the rating of the person. But they, in turn, might be equally as interested in finding out whether I really am a 16-year-old girl that's a cheerleader for the high school football team in Topeka, Kansas.
Right.
So it's all a matter of perspective. But I would think you're being sort of person neutral. You're checking everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody's a part of we're all individuals in the real world, right? And we're accountable for what we do. And there are laws about bad behavior and things like that. Well, right now the internet seems to be still with the wild, wild west. But you're right. Simply put, it's everybody that's participating in these environments, especially environments where you're just connecting with strangers, both sides of the equation, they're going to want to know need to know, right, who the other person is, so they're safe. And it goes beyond just safety, of course. It's even if you know that they're real and the person is safe, there are benefits to being able to know a little bit more about the other person that you're going to engage with in certain contexts, especially dating. And if you're buying and selling online, you probably don't care as much about the fact that somebody likes puppies and is a good person. But you want to know that they're real and haven't scammed a bunch of other folks, right? So
yeah, and I also want to know if that person has been involved and convicted of a violent crime. That goes through my head when I use things like Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. We've bought and sold a lot of stuff through the various online marketplaces, and there's always, largely because I work in cybersecurity and have instilled doubt and fear and skepticism in everything we do, especially if it touches online. My wife is always we need to meet in a public place. We need to make sure someone else is home. because she's one of her fears, and my fears too, is like, what if that person is some kind of violent offender or something?
No, you just described the perfect example of a use case, right? And why a platform like RealMe needs to be applied to more of these environments, because the stories are all over the place,
right?
And they're horrifying, right? I mean, I've almost been scammed. Gosh, I have been scammed, that's for sure. But I've almost been scammed a number of other times, many other times, because too few of these environments are actually doing anything in order to try and improve the security of those environments and the safety of the customers, right?
But like,
I mean,
has your skepticism ever made you feel bad? Because it has for me, where you're always skeptical. You're like, I don't know, and then like the dude that bought my tires pulled up in like the nicest Mercedes like I've ever seen, and like gave me cash, and it was totally fine. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a really paranoid person, and I feel bad because you're basically judging people. I mean, because you don't know who the person is really, because they're online, and you're almost judging that this person's going to be a criminal or a scam artist.
No, you're right on target. It's like, but what did your parents always tell you, right? Don't talk to
strangers. Yeah.
Right. Well, the unfortunate truth is now, thanks to the internet, hey, a lot of good has come out of this. There are a lot of good services that are connecting strangers, that facilitate transactions. These services are putting them together. Okay, so you have to talk to strangers, right? But as long as you're talking to a stranger, wouldn't you rather know a bit more about them so that you can, make a decision as to whether or not you wanted to move forward? So we're talking to strangers, but hopefully they won't be as strange, right? With a platform like this, with RealMe. So that's the objective. And yeah, I feel a little bit bad too, but I'll tell you what, I'm so close to it. I've seen the statistics. I mean, not only have I been a victim, right, but I've seen the statistics around how bad it's getting in terms of people getting taken advantage of and hurt. And it freaks me out even more. So, so I think for the people that are listening on this, I mean, I'm happy that we're getting our kind of like business story out there a bit, but really, if if anything comes out of this, even just a little bit comes out for your consumers, I mean, everybody should be a bit more wary, because the statistics are pretty bad around the bad stuff going on out there. And so don't be a victim, be a little bit more careful. If a service you're using has not implemented RealMe, go try and check the people out that you're engaging with, right? Because there's too much bad stuff happening out there, and we don't want that to happen.
Jeff, there's a big difference between getting scammed, being out some money, versus getting hurt, losing your life, right? What are the statistics on each? I mean, is it pretty, like, both are pretty prevalent, basically, or scamming, I would imagine, is probably higher than getting hurt?
You know what? I don't have a breakdown in front of me. We've done a few kind of nationwide studies on this topic. What I know offhand is that 30% of the population has been a victim in one way or another. Gotcha. 30% of the U.S. population, scam, fraud, or worse.
Right.
What I don't know off
is the breakdown. Yeah.
Kind of like what has there been? What's the breakdown of like the violent kind of stuff, the really bad stuff, the really horrifying things that are happening out there? But it happens. You can read the stories all over the place. But I don't know the composition of that 30% that's been hurt in the United States. But at the end of the day, if that's our objective, is get rid of this. None of it should be happening, right? Especially the really horrifying stuff. Money is one thing, but life is another, obviously.
Sure.
I want to, if I can take a second to shift gears a little bit, Paul. I'm thinking about possible applications of what it is you're doing in my day job, where I do a lot of consulting based on compliance. One of the requirements is pre-employment screening, and I'm wondering if if what you're doing in terms of, I know you're not going out and doing the actual checks, you're aggregating them from sources, but if you do it in such a way that's efficient and cost effective, e.g. cheaper, there might be some not just into online marketplaces, but into companies that are just trying to hire employees, especially the ones that like to take looks at people's Facebook, Instagram, whatever pages before they hire them, that type of thing. Which begs the question, which I'm finally getting to, is so you collect all this data. This is a question I ask the HR departments of lots of my customers. You get all this data, then what? What do you do with it? How do you make a determination besides the obvious? Oh, this is a convicted child sex offender, and he's got his own website naming him. But when it's background checks, criminal investigations, whatever else is that you're doing, you just simply turn the data over, or are you playing at all, or researching, attempting to figure out the rating system? What matters? What are the indicators of buyer beware? Or is it simply more a matter of here's what we found, do with it what you will?
Yeah, a couple of interesting questions in there. I mean, one is that, for what it's worth, it's the laws are such, we actually are not what's called a CRA. We're not a consumer reporting agency. So people are not allowed to use our data assets for determination of things like employment, credit, whether you want to rent a place to someone. So the service is not used for that purpose. And we're really careful about making sure that people are aware of what the laws are. Frankly, I think the laws are outdated, but nevertheless, we are careful to adhere to those laws. So you're not really you're not allowed to use the service. And we tell people, you're not allowed to use our service for those restricted reasons. Dating and checking out somebody that's you're buying and selling with, that's totally fine. But related to your other question about the data assets, we actually do in our environment, we have actually done some scoring, right? Because we on our side can, pulling in all of this information from a variety of sources, we have taken the time to structure that data and understand what it means and bring that forward for the consumer. But we can only do so well there. At the end of the day, human beings are smarter than the computers, at least right now, right? Mm-hmm. All right, maybe I guess, was it Watson that beat Kasparov? But anyway, it's like, we think, bringing the information forward so that we might be able to put some scoring at the top, but you as an individual are going to be able to judge the information, make use of the information, interpret that information better than we probably can today. So we just try to bring that information forward for you to consider, right?
Which begs the question: what do your lawyers say? You got to have them on retainer, because sooner or later, if it hasn't happened already, somebody's going to come after you for the negative image that you portrayed and the action that someone did or didn't take. Yeah,
well, we're kind of like just the middleman that's like kind of aggregated the information, and we're not trying to make people look bad.
I think we call that the messenger.
Yeah, because you're not going to sue the credit bureau because you have a poor credit score, or the database that has your criminal information because someone found out you're a criminal, right? That's.
You know what, Paul? Your example of kind of the credit kind of company is just spot on. Even though we're not a credit company, we're not a consumer reporting agency. It has some similar elements to it, right? We're trying to bring information forward so you can make decisions in other contexts outside of credit and tenancy and those things that are restricted. So yeah, nobody loves necessarily having a credit score, but it's something that's valuable, right? We have a score right now. The score is not necessarily the most valuable thing in our environment. The score basically for us is like an easy way for a consumer to understand a quick summary of what's maybe contained within any given kind of RealMe profile. But really, at the end of the day, the consumers are looking at the details about who that person is and their behavior to make a choice, right? But I really appreciate kind of the you really get all this stuff, Paul. The platform itself. It's like we're trying to facilitate a smart choice, right? And we're not trying to make anybody look bad. Everybody needs to be accountable and responsible for their own behaviors at the end of the day. So it isn't the wild, wild west.
And you may not care. And a lot of that is just the history of hackers. Some hackers have been convicted of crimes and they got great jobs as a result. Again, to our audience, I'm not suggesting if you go commit a crime today, and get convicted, that's a way to get a job. It is not. That's, I think, a very much a legacy thing. But again, it allows the employer, in this example, right, allows the employer to make a decision whether or not you want to hire that person. It's not saying it's a, binary thing, 0 or 1, like criminal record, no. Some employers, yes. Some employers, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, like in the RealMe service, it's like employers are not to use our, service for this purpose. We're working with, like I said, dating sites and marketplaces, services that connect strangers, where it's not about employment, tenancy, credit, those sorts of things I mentioned that are restricted. But yeah, otherwise you got it exactly right.
Do you see the RealMe platform kind of taking off with a digital identity for something, say like a legacy social security number replacement? I know you guys are doing some work with New Zealand and the government there for some of their identification. Do you see that taking off in other places where we have legacy systems that are outdated that could tie into voter systems or single sign-on for things like voting?
I mean, I think a lot of companies out there have tried to create a centralized kind of identity that can be used in a variety of different purposes, right? And that still needs to be, I think there are a lot of benefits to somebody really pulling that off. I mean, for us, we are just trying to make these, these marketplaces that connect strangers safer. I mean, if that's successful, then obviously there are a lot of opportunities to extend that core capability to centralize, give other kind of capabilities and utility around use of your identity. But at least for us, short-term, our mission is pretty simple. It's like, I just want less crime, less scamming, less fraud, fewer people getting hurt in negative ways. And so, gosh, our aspirations are not as big as maybe what yours. I mean, those are that.
Good for you, Jeff. Stick to the problem you solve and your point of view, man.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're trying to do.
Good job of that. Yeah.
That's what we can. We're not trying to bite off more than what we could chew right now. There are big problems in the areas that we're trying to help right now.
Jeff, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly? You didn't get prepped on this? Oh, no one gets prepped on this.
You know what? The guys told me, like, you're not sharing anything with me. You're just going to put me on the spot, like with all kinds of stuff.
Right. That's essentially what we did.
Is your first question, is this my real hair?
No. But there are 5 questions.
But is the guy behind you in the framed article, is that you in a younger day?
Yeah, it is. That's me.
Hilarious.
That's
nice observation, Jeff.
Yeah, that's funny. So yeah, my first company was kind of a marketplace for domain names. So we didn't own domain names. We just kind of like had almost like an eBay, like for domain names. So anyway, I made the cover of this funny little magazine.
That was like right after you had to call like the one woman who would assign you the domain name. I never knew that existed, but I was listening to one of the books I recently listened to. And they said there was a time where, like, when you needed a domain name, you would literally call this one person, and that person would help you register your domain name.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, back in like '94, you had to fill out this form. It felt like you were sending something into a government, into the government. It was like an IRS type form, right? And you were just hoping that it would come back, or you were able to get the domain name. Very funny.
Now you can. Now it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
For sure. So, Jeff, Security Weekly 5 questions. Are you ready?
All right. I'll do the best I can.
3 words to describe yourself.
Bald, happy, and bald. No, bald, happy, and appreciative.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh my God. I'm the guy that's trying to keep people from doing bad things out there.
It's just a hypothetical. There's no right or wrong answers, and we don't judge you until the recording stops. So,
God, it's so funny. It's just not my nature. It's like, I love people. Like, I know you guys don't know me. It's like, this isn't bullshit. I mean, it's like the idea of hurting a human being is just it's not who I am. I can't even answer that question.
No answer is an answer. So
what comes to mind is like clue. It's like, are those my options? Like rope, candlestick, or whatever?
In the library, because you're in the library. So
I'm in the library.
Revolver, wrench,
revolver, Jeff, in the library. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a revolver. I'm not a gun guy. I'm afraid of guns, but I don't know, whatever. Candlestick, because I have one right back here.
There you go.
Not my nature, Ben.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
I'm tired. No. No.
Sorry, go ahead.
Learning to love everybody. I know it sounds sick, and maybe this isn't for your audience, but like I just have this soft kind of like core to me.
What's your favorite hacker movie? Do you watch hacker movies, Jeff? Have you seen hacker movies in the past?
What have I seen? Give me some examples. I mean, one of my favorite movies that's out there is The Matrix, right? I mean,
we'd classify that as a hacker movie. Yep.
Yeah. But what we really want to know is sneakers
or hackers
or war games or hackers. These are movies from the 80s and 90s.
War game.
I loved war games. That's how old I am. Loved war games.
Whoever's making the tally, that's another one for me.
No, the war games is neutral ground for Jeff and I. Sneakers, you're in camp, Jeff. Hackers, you're in camp, Paul. Like war games,
team
Tron,
Paul, team
Matrix. Jeff. Like you're somewhere in between, right?
The middle ground.
I think we need a Gartner quadrant for all
right,
this.
We do. Yes. Jeff, choose two celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
You guys, you're. This is a wild group. Two parents, two famous people to be my parents. Shit. I don't even like follow that world, to be honest with you. My fiance happens to be a real actress, but it's like I don't stay close to that whole world.
You probably don't want to pick her as your mom. That would be weird.
That'd be weird.
Yeah.
But we won't judge till after the show.
No. How about Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones?
There you go. There you go. Fantastic. Jeff, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Hey, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate the time.
With that, we're going to take a short break. Come back with Gordon Draper. Stick around. Can you pinpoint the 10 security gaps in your attack surface that account for 90% of your risk? It's impossible using a combination of scanners, pen tests, breach and attack simulation tools, and manual processes. But attackers can find your gaps. They perform recon and target the weaknesses with the best return. The Cycognito platform sees your external attack surface the way attackers do, eliminating blind spots. Powered by a global bot network, the Cycognito platform prioritizes your highest risk security gaps, integrates with existing workflows, and reduces operational costs. Visit securityweekly.com/Cycognito. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person December 5th through the 8th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista Hotel. Call for presentations deadline has been extended until tomorrow, July 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you're going to submit your talk, I know how you folks roll in InfoSec. It's going to be 11:58 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're going to get about a dozen or two submissions to the CFP, which is totally fine. Just make sure you get in before the deadline. If you don't, send me a note. I may know someone that could help you out with that. But you can go to Security Weekly Unlocked, securityweekly.com/unlocked.
You just gave them an out, Paul.
I did. I know. I shouldn't have said that. No, don't message me. securityweekly.com/unlocked. Joining us now, Gordon Draper is the founder of cybermarket.com, a marketplace where cybersecurity consultancies and clients can find each other. In his spare time, he hunts for bug bounties, investigating vehicle to everything, and develops training courses for the next generation of InfoSec professionals. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Is that an Archer? Is that the Archer? The office?
I was going to say, that's the Archer background.
That's his mom's office.
That's exactly right. It's the backgrounds in Archer are intricately drawn. And when the pandemic came along, I had to find a Zoom background. And I figured this is perfect. It shows that you're busy in the office, but
there's lots of liquor. If I remember the show correctly. Yes. That's awesome. Gordon, how'd you get your start in information security?
So I had been following information security for a long time. I've been around for about 20 years in IT. And I went and I did an engineering degree. And then after the engineering degree, I went and did later on, I went and did some work with engineering for utilities. And then later on, I said, I'm done with utilities and project management of various engineering. I'm going to move into cybersecurity. And so I went and did a Master's of IT Security at university. And while I was there, I was picked up by one of the boutique consultancies that was just starting up in Sydney. And I've been doing pen testing, red teaming, incident response, governance, risk and compliance, security architecture. A couple of years ago, I started my own business called FortSafe, which is also one of the consultancies that's working within the cybermarket.com marketplace.
That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you, Gordon, Australia's really far from the U.S., obviously, right? And I feel like us in the U.S. aren't in tune with kind of the information security scene. Space and time, right? Yeah, I mean, you're from the future, essentially. But we're not as in tune with the kind of the culture and the scene that happens in Australia with respects to the hacker scene and the information security culture. Could you kind of maybe describe that for us?
Sure. So a couple of years ago in Sydney, there's a community chat channel and event talks and events called Sec Talks. That's held in most capital cities in Australia, and I think it's been exported to some cities in Europe as well, to UK and Amsterdam. And so it's a monthly one talk plus a CTF challenge, and then everyone goes to the pub. And so it's just a wonderful way of meeting and connecting with other people inside the community. And a few years ago, there was out of that a community, various InfoSec conferences started popping up around 2016. And so I helped run one called Platypus Con in Sydney in 2016.
Nice.
But we've got the main one is B-Sides Canberra, and each year I go over to Black Hat and DEF CON, but our borders are shut at the moment, and Sydney's in lockdown, so not this year. We'll have to do it virtually again.
Gotcha. And are there a lot of degree programs at universities in Australia for cybersecurity?
They're starting to really pick up, yeah. So it's still seen as an advanced topic, which is a pity. So it's not until when I did my master's in 2015, it was that was the first year that they were doing cybersecurity courses, and so pen testing and web apps and incident response was one of the first years that they were doing it in the university that I was at. But another university, UNSW, is internationally renowned for hacking and security, InfoSec. So we've had some good people come through that university, even finishing in the top 5, I think it is, in DEF CON CTF.
Nice.
1 year. So there's definitely some good people coming through.
If I had to describe what you do, and now I remember seeing your request come in for guests, I was like, that sounds good, because it sounds like a dating site for InfoSec nerds. Right?
It's kind of similar. It's it's sort of like it's a marketplace. It's global, and it's connecting cybersecurity consultancies in a way that the consultancies, a lot of consultants are highly trained and are working for bigger consultancies, but they're moving out to, a lot of them are seeing that, there's a daily rate of a few $1,000s a day that they're getting charged out for, and they're getting paid hundreds. So they see that difference and think, oh, I can go out and if only I had a sales arm and a pipeline of work coming in, I could go out and charge those numbers myself. And so that's what a lot of consultants are doing at the moment. The next in Australia, New Zealand, we had a company called CyberCX, which was, I think it's venture backed, but it's gobbled up. It's merged about 17 consultancies, I think, maybe even more. And so it's a mega consultancy, and that it's various consultants, while they're highly trained, when they don't necessarily like being in very large consultancies. And if the consultancy doesn't prioritize training and just treats them as a sweatshop worker, which does happen in some consultancies, they're looking for ways out. And and starting their own consultancy is one of those ways.
How does that brokerage work then? Are you guys just taking a small percentage? Whose paper is that on? Like, are the contracts and liability insurance and vetting of the consultancies? Like, where does your kind of middle brokerage fit in, and how does the consultant need to be set up in order to work with your marketplace?
That's a really good question. So the marketplace, a consultancy object needs to be created. We're trying to mirror what's happening in the real world. So you've got a consultancy, and you've got a principal consultant or a consultancy admin for the purposes of the marketplace, and that person can make bids on projects that are being put up by clients. So clients come to the marketplace and post projects, and consultancy admins can have a look and go, all right, I'm going to sign an NDA and have a look at the scope of this, and then submit a proposal. And when they submit a proposal, they tag in the consultant profile on the marketplace to show that this is the person that's going to be doing the work. Now, the consultants are background checked, police checked, industry certifications checked, education qualifications checked, and there's an interview with a previous customer that the consultants work for. And that during that interview, we go through, I've done some research associated with, academic research associated with trust, and I've focused on questions associated with competency, benevolence, and integrity. And so there's a bunch of different questions, and based on all of those questions, and the interview gives you 1/5 of an overall rating score for a consultant. So you could end up with a 5-star consultant, and that gives you the consultancy admin submits the proposal with a consultant for the work, and then the client can have a look at all of the bids that have been made and decide which ones they want to award to, and move through to a complete project management suite of tools. So effectively, you could, from a consultancy management perspective, you could actually run a remote consultancy through this marketplace.
Well, so it's that involved, right? Where it's not just hooking me up with someone that wants a pen test, right? I can kind of manage. It's not just
a swipe right.
Yeah, I can manage the contract. But I did want to ask you, Gordon. So it sounds like the reference check is 1/5 of the score. Did you say that? Like, what are the other 4?
Roughly, yeah. It's an algorithm that just sets the initial score, and then after the initial score, there's feedback from the client, which comes back to which loops back into the rating score for moving forwards. So that's why I describe it as it's similar to Uber in that you get a rating score, and each engagement is given you end up getting a rating score from that feedback from that engagement, which loops back in and gives you, so you can have a 5-star or 4.8.
Right. So you gotta have a clean.
With a less than 3, then you can be removed from the marketplace.
So you gotta have a clean background check. You gotta have a clean reference. They get you the first part of your score. The rest of your score is determined by basically a crowdsourced rating system from the clients that you do business with through the platform.
Yes, that's correct.
That's interesting. So you gotta keep your clients separate.
Now, are there alternatives to like some of the prereqs and qualifications? Because I mean, there's a lot of us that don't have degrees. There's a lot of us that don't
have certs that have certs that have expired, like myself.
Yes.
Well, expired certification, for example, it's still treated with a certain amount of score, but the factor that it is expired scores against you.
Yeah. Jeff, you had a question?
I mean, an AWS architect certificate, for example, AWS in the last 3 years has brought out a whole bunch of different tools, different products. And so being an AWS security architect, a security specialist, will give you one level of assurance, but the fact that that it hasn't been renewed, if it's been longer than 3 years, that will count against you.
Jeff?
Now from an off.
No,
Jeff.
Tyler.
Hold
on. Jeff, then Tyler.
A couple questions. I guess initially, maybe it's a multi-part question. How do you guys define what a consultant or a consultancy actually is? What does that even mean?
Jeff, did you change your background to also a Archer background?
I did.
I love it.
Well done.
Same office, but I'm sitting behind the desk.
Right, different view.
Well, I don't have the library that the previous interviewee had. I have the drawing instead.
That's it.
He's got the real thing, so he's one-up me on that. The question was surrounding...
what is a consultant? What is a consultancy in the context of
so,
what you're doing?
A consultancy has to be a formal business entity.
Mm-hmm.
So that could either be... In Australia, we have sole trader and a private company, a limited company. So it'd be like a LLC.
What's your equivalent of the LLC in Australia?
Yeah, PTY Ltd in Australia.
Okay.
So that's you've got directors, employees.
Do they have to have? Do they have to have insurance?
Yes.
What type of is there a specific? Because there's different types, right? There's liability, and then the errors and omission.
PIPL, so professional indemnity and public liability.
So is that like
is the
errors
packages
and
that we
omission?
use in Australia. So something similar to that.
Yeah.
For the USA.
Yeah, because errors and omission would be the insurance in the USA that if you're doing pen testing, you get to a certain point where RFPs and clients will require that not only you have liability, but you have a certain amount of errors and omissions, right? $1 million of errors and omissions, at least back almost 20 years ago when I was doing it, was the limit. It's probably higher now.
To 10 maybe.
Yeah.
10 to, and public, I think, is 20 roughly in Australia. So there's the industry standard is higher, is more than just a million in Australia. Although some people get away with the lowest level, but some businesses do require a higher level of insurance.
Tyler, you're shaking your head. You don't have insurance, Tyler.
No, I definitely do. I mean, a million is definitely within the U.S.
Within the U.S.
he's insured with Bitcoin.
Yeah. So $1 million to $3 million in the U.S. is pretty much the standard, but that can vary. Sure.
Cool.
Pretty much, yeah. Any 500 fortune is going to be that.
If I may, though, let me try to restate the question because, it's a certain type of company.
So it's a business
responding. But in terms of a person, an individual who you're presumably works for the consultancy, the consultant, what is your idea? And this is not a right or wrong question. This is just I'm trying to get an idea of what you mean, because in America, at least in my experience, a lot of people call themselves consultants, and they do a vast variety of different things. I happen to be a consultant. I know what I am. I meet people that are also consultants. They do something completely different. So maybe a better way to ask the question is, do you have like sort of categories or buckets that you lump these consultancies in to try to categorize what they do?
There's services that they can provide. So a cybersecurity consultancy might provide pen testing or be an incident response capability, or a governance, risk and compliance. They may offer virtual CISO to small to medium businesses. And so there's different services that can be provided, but it's not and brings me to another category associated with the levels of consultants. So you have a junior, a senior, and a principal consultant, and they can end up being charged out by the consultancy at different prices. So it's the levels associated with that to determine what they. So you can end up having different categories in the marketplace associated with. Hey, we're only looking for the bottom cheapest pen test, and we're happy for a junior pen test to do that. So you go to the junior pen test, the junior consultant marketplace. So the consultancy, while they're different to different people, a cybersecurity consultancy, or at least a function of a cybersecurity consultancy, these services are pretty well defined across the industry. And so while the customer may not necessarily be knowledgeable about exactly what they're looking for, in the same way that someone comes to say, hey, I want a red team, what are you looking for? Well, the red team may, they end up describing a vulnerability assessment. So different, they're not really sure what they're looking for.
Yeah, how do you vet whether the company is a pen test puppy mill, as we've so unlovingly called those things? Because, some of these places, as we all very know, some places offer what we would define as a penetration test that we've defined in this show on numerous occasions. Other people and companies, I should say, call it a pen test, but it's really not that. It doesn't go into the level of depth and there can be a misconception. So, Gordon, does your platform help us kind of weed out what we call the pen test puppy mill?
That's a very good question. So, what I'm planning on doing with the platform is having a peer review process. So, an obligation that as a consultancy on the marketplace, you have to review a certain number of other people's work that have been redacted to a certain extent, but you have to make sure that you give them a score based on how good their work is, and not just spelling and grammar, but are they actually doing a proper pen test, or are they just doing a burp suite active scan or a Nessus scan?
I guess one of my concerns, Gordon, is like, what if a customer is upset for reasons that just slipped out of your control? And I think anyone who is a pen tester today, working in cybersecurity, maybe you're not pen testing, right? But you have clients, like there's always at least that one-off where you're like, I did everything. And an example, they're just upset because I found vulnerabilities in their network, even though that's what they hired me to do, right? Do you have a system that can kind of handle that? Like, I guess it's kind of like a sliding grade, like, right? You throw out the highest score and the lowest score. I hate to say that it's a grading on a scale, but do you take that into consideration?
There's a dispute process associated with so there is a way to flag an engagement experience that it can go into a dispute process, and that'll be reviewed by cybermarket.com staff and worked through, hear both sides of the story and say, at the end of the day, it's a milestone that clients have to approve to pay the consultancy. And if they're withholding that for some reason because they're for unjust, it's the marketplace takes the money up front, and so can release the funds to the consultancy as the outcome of a dispute process.
Oh, so do you handle the financial transaction as well?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
so
brave.
the financial transaction. It's once you've awarded the process involves before you can bid on the process, on the project, you have to sign an NDA, and so we got that going with an integration with DocuSign.
Yep.
And then after the NDA is signed, you can submit your proposal and your bid, and then if the client awards the project to you, you both negotiate milestones associated with the project, and as part of that milestone negotiation and service agreement signed, but once again through DocuSign. At the time that is all signed and we move into the project implementation phase, before all of that occurs, the funds are taken with for the project. It takes the value of the bid, and there's a commission on top, for using the marketplace.
So when is the blockchain backed smart contracts going to be integrated?
We'll see how we go. That's a very good question. It's I have done some work with blockchain and Bitcoin in my research. It's not. I haven't necessarily decided to move it onto a blockchain just yet. An advisor I was chatting to was like, "Oh, you could. How do you provide a form of equity to the consultancies to make sure that they stay and use the platform?" And one of the suggestions they came up with was, "Oh, why don't you just create a cryptocurrency, a token, and give them a percentage of give them tokens to a certain value, which could either be equity or something related to the site. So hey, you've got 50,000 cybermarket dollars."
Gordon, two-part question. Do you support the concept of a deposit or prepaying a certain percentage up front? And what do you do if a client doesn't pay?
So the platform is designed so that everything is paid up front, but you can, once it's paid up front, you put it into milestones, and so you can then decide, okay, well, the first part component is a deposit, so that'll be an early milestone.
Yep.
So we'll release the funds there.
I got. So you can create a payment schedule based on the project, which is smart.
Yep.
I like that. Yep.
But it has to be fully funded into the marketplace to make sure that we don't have situations where the client says, "Oh, I'm not going to pay."
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because I mean, if you've done consulting for any period of time, again, it's that other rule, right? You got the one client that wasn't happy, and you got the one client that didn't pay. And if you're lucky, you've got those kind of one-offs in your business.
In percentages, hopefully this will get reasonable size. So with percentages, it's still going to be an effort that is required.
Right.
You still do end up with disputes.
Sure.
It's fundamentally, while you're doing a service for a pen test or a GRC audit, at the end of the day, it's not what you want it to be adversarial, but the client is not necessarily happy that an audit found vulnerabilities, or
right. It happens, man.
Pen test found vulnerabilities, or an audit found various things lacking, and now they have to spend money on it.
I had one client in all of my businesses in the past 20 plus years, one client go Chapter 11. And my lawyer and accountant at the time was like, yeah, like, to just move on, dude. Like, don't even, you could spend more resources like trying to get your money right. And that's, again, 20 plus years of business, that happened once. So
yeah, that's definitely a factor. It sucks, but that's why I am strong about making sure that there's funding up front.
Yeah, and that's smart.
In which using the platform is the intended purpose.
Well, I'm wondering what the startup time is. I mean, you talked about all the processes you get to vet somebody before they're able to do stuff. I'm wondering how because that could be incredibly manual.
Lee,
is
that a different angle of the Archer office? It is.
What Archer office? Well,
Very
Jeff
good.
had the other one, so I had to.
Oh wait, I moved around. I'm in a different place.
That's right.
Tell me about your GRC category. I'm trying to figure out if my is listed. That's my failed.
Yeah, certainly. So it's having spent a couple of years doing GRC audits for international bank. It's available for any sorts of specific audits associated with different standards. So you might need there might be a space for a PCI DSS. What are they? I forget the acronym right now. It's a QSA or something.
QSA.
The assessor.
Qualified Security Assessor. Yep. QSA. Qualified Security Assessor.
I thought the A stood for something else, but
only in your mind.
And associated with a NIST audit, or a cybersecurity framework, or a controls audit associated with 853. Or a third-party vendor. The global bank I was working for was headquartered in Australia, so it was required to meet a certain financial regulation guideline that came in called APRA CPS 234, which was associated with the board of directors being directly responsible for the cybersecurity of any third-party vendors.
Well, let me ask another question another way. I'm sorry. How are you filling your knowledge base of companies?
How am I filling? Sorry, you'll have to expand a bit on that, please.
Sure,
Jeff. Say it in Australian.
How am I filling the companies? How am I finding companies to come join?
How are you throwing the consultancies on the Barbie? How do you identify them? List them,
So there's an onboarding process associated with the consultants, with the background checks, etc. So that can take a bit of time because it's manual at the moment. But the idea is to have that to a certain extent automated to assist, and that's the background checks, the police check, the education check, qualifications check, the industry certifications check, the interviews with previous customers. That still needs to be people based. So the classifying consultancies, they have a public profile so that they can write whatever they would like about themselves. The consultancies get rated out of 5, as well as the consultants. So there's potential for a leaderboard of international consultancies, and likewise a leaderboard of international cybersecurity consultants.
Gordon, some people that work as consultants today do have a criminal record. Most of us know they have a criminal record. Are they automatically excluded? There are no exceptions?
No, they're not automatically excluded.
Okay.
But if that is that would affect the rating score. Mm-hmm. So while they may have had a criminal record, it may be associated with something that's unrelated to InfoSec. It comes down to
what if they were convicted for? Many of them have been convicted. Many of them are convicted.
Put on it.
What if they're convicted under the U.S. Title 18 CFAA, or have been in the past? Is that an issue, or it just affects their score?
I think that would be an issue. Basically, it comes down to what the clients would want. So if the clients would see that would not be prepared to hire a consultant that has been past the the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, then they might not necessarily be wanting to have that person on their network. Mind you, there's the old adage associated with you spend the time, and then after you spent the time, you become a highly paid consultant.
Right.
So that needs to be it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. It needs to be evaluated to determine, are they trustworthy for a client, and that gets reflected in the rating score. So it doesn't necessarily exclude them completely. It just gives them a lower rating score than someone that doesn't have a criminal record.
So have you had any that didn't make the cut, didn't make the grade just to begin with, or that you've had to ask to leave?
No, not yet. So we're still early days. We've just got to the point where we're onboarding consultancies at the moment. So we've got about 4-5 consultancies that are in the process of being onboarded at the moment. And we've also got an Australian Stock Exchange listed financial services company we're in negotiations with to try to convince them to use the marketplace. They're actually very keen to use the marketplace for an overflow as a partial full-time employee man hours and keep consultants on a retainer. So they're very interested in being able to use the marketplace in that way.
Does that include like incident response and like NOC/SOC analysts, people to spin up for
forensics firms?
Forensics, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be room for them as well. So the incident response teams can come on and list their services as. So the idea is that we turn cyber market into a one-stop shop for cyber services. Products can potentially come later, but we're starting small. We don't need to own the world just yet. Starting small as a global marketplace.
But it also sounds like you're really leveraging the human touch. You're not out there posting on a bulletin board. You're actually reaching out to people person to person to build relationships.
Yeah, so it's not just advertising and brand awareness to make sure that clients come into the marketplace, or consultancies in that matter. it does include posting on Facebook groups, for example, saying, "Hey, come join the marketplace as consultants." But the client side of things, we're treating it. I basically decided that I could either ramp up my own consultancy or create a marketplace and ramp up that. And I figured the marketplace would be more beneficial for solving the problem that I had, which was, why can't I just go somewhere and select a job from a job list as a independent consultancy? Why can't I just get like an assassin board on John Wick, that kind of thing?
So what? I mean, what's the overhead if I want to use your services? It seems like it would scale nicely, but right now it might be a little high.
Yeah, it's there's overhead associated with the people's touch, as you described, associated with an interview with the prospective consultant, and interview with previous customers, and onboarding, checking their identity, background checking, etc. Bringing them on. There is some overhead associated with that, and so we'll be looking for ways of improving those processes down the track. There's always room for improvement and efficiency.
But I also assume as a member of your service, I'm giving you something out of each of my engagements. Is that a correct assumption? Or
yeah. So the cost to the client and the consultancy is there's a commission associated with each transaction that passes through, as well as a subscription service for the consultancy based on per consultant. So if there's a consultancy with 10 consultants, the consultancy pays for the 10 consultants to be listed on the marketplace. At the end of the day, the consultancy admin's coming along and going, "Hey, I want Paul to be the consultant that does the job," and the client's going, "Okay, well, you want Paul, so you're submitting Paul. I've got someone from a different someone from India submitting a request with Rajesh to come and be the consultant." And so they can actually look at who the person is, what the rating is of that consultant, and make an objective decision.
Rajesh wins every time in that scenario, just saying.
It seems like you're not going to be confined to any one country. You're looking at a worldwide potential base.
So it's a .com, but I've got trademarks in the UK and Europe, and negotiating with India. And we've got one in Australia, and still working out the quirks of the trademark system for cybermarket.com in the USA. So the idea is to go big, yes.
Any unexpected difficulty in doing all that, or has it been about what you expect?
It's pretty much what I expect. The international arm of the lawyers that I've got, trademark lawyers, have been very good at putting through. There's the Madrid protocol associated with putting in trademarks around the globe, and so I've put in requests within that protocol. The only one I've come up with is I'll most likely have to change the logo very slightly for the USA, as there's another cybersecurity company with a similar logo. So that's it won't be a very big change. It'll just be a difference.
Yeah. Well, that sounds pretty optimistic overall. I was expecting it to be much more difficult for you.
No, it was actually quite simple. That the lawyers submitted there's an international agreement which for trademarks called the Madrid Protocol, and which you just submit for whichever classes in whichever countries, and the lawyers went and did it for a fee, as lawyers do.
Mm-hmm. Everything comes with a fee when we talk about attorneys.
Yes.
Jeff?
So picking up again on the I'm still trying to fish for whether my company was listed. It sounds like if my company wants to be listed, it needs to engage with you. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes. The before the consultants and consultancy gets approved, it needs to be the consultants need to be background checked. Now, I don't know if you have a particular computer fraud, a CFAA record, but I've heard that you're ex-NSA, so there may be a space for you on the marketplace.
You're just dangling that carrot, aren't you?
Oh, we'd love to have you on the marketplace.
Well, out of curiosity, you brought it up first. He brought it up first, Paul. He mentioned PCI and QSAs. There's somewhere south of roughly 400 QSA companies in the world. By my best estimate, there's about 85 or so that are licensed to operate in Australia, let's say. Is it your intent to list all of them? You would love to list all of them? Do you know if you have listed any QSA companies to date?
I think I've got one of the consultancies that's coming on that does have a PCI DSS certification. I don't know if I think they are a QSA, but they were with a particular organization and they've gone out and started their own, and they're doing quite well. They've got about 5 employees at the moment, and so I'm looking to onboard that company onto the marketplace. I've been having interviews with them recently, and so I would love to have 100% of all of these companies on the marketplace, but I'm realistic in that if I can get 20 or 30%, that's still a good place. I'd like to have closer to 80 to 100% of companies and have cybermarket.com as a one-stop shop. So I like to say, need cyber, think cybermarket.com.
Gordon, to that end, is it focused on pen testing, or could it be any project where we're willing to take on a consultant to complete a project related to cybersecurity?
The cybersecurity element. So that could be a pen test. It could be a security assessment, a technical security assessment associated with a project, just to make sure that it passes the security assessment gate.
Does it have to be? So let me rephrase the question, Gordon. Does it have to be a security assessment, or could it be a research project or some other kind of engagement where self-servingly, I need talent in cybersecurity. I'm putting together an
talent in cybersecurity. You're right.
Okay.
It's talent in cybersecurity. So you may need a SOC analyst for a 6-month contract. You can do that through the marketplace.
If I need someone to do webcasts or labs research or something like that, right? That's all good.
You may be able to. It's cybersecurity services at the moment. Mm-hmm. So while it's not necessarily a creative content or marketplace, sure, similar to Fiverr or other creatives marketplaces. So it's specific to a cybersecurity service. Mm-hmm.
Tyler, Jeff Lee. Sorry, go ahead, Gordon.
Go.
Tyler, Jeff Lee.
I'm good.
That was a very selfish question towards the end, in case you were wondering.
Well, it's related to cybersecurity. You're looking for helping with the webcast. It's not necessarily a freelancer.com where you can just go and find someone to go do something, right, or a Airtasker. It's specifically for cybersecurity services.
Yeah, I'd be looking for someone to do cybersecurity research on a topic and then present on it as part of the project. As an example,
you can do that as a project.
Right.
I'm sure you could find someone from a consultancy who will do that for you.
Right, and to your point, Gordon, like if you're out there and doing pen tests, like that's the person I want to do some research and then come present on it, because I'm looking for people with that experience, basically.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on the marketplace to put forward a project for research.
Yeah,
I'll show you the link and we'll get everything prepared.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Is there a cost to the client, or like what are there costs associated to be involved with it, or you just have to go through the process and then you make your money basically taking a percentage?
So there's the percentage, but there's also a subscription fee on a monthly basis for the consultancy and the consultant.
Okay, but not for the client. If I want to go put in an RFP, I don't have to pay a subscription.
I did some work in the security department in freelancer.com, and they had scammers and spammers on the marketplace, and I've implemented a nominal fee in order to submit a project.
Okay,
so you don't so to avoid those sorts of spammers.
Yeah, perfect.
So there's I think it's about $10 to submit a project, and there's and bidding is protected as well, because
awesome.
you don't want one consultancy to spam every single project necessarily.
Right. That's awesome.
And so the cost of the client, the consultancy is going to most likely put through the commission into their costs. And so both sides end up paying for it.
Yeah, that's fair. Gordon, just 5 additional questions. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yeah, looking forward to it.
3 words to describe yourself. Excuse me.
Tenacious, upbeat, and energetic.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Well, I've seen a few knife fights in various movies, so I think it'd be a knife. I don't think it would necessarily be a poison or I don't see myself doing any kind of harm to anyone at all, to be honest. But given the premise of the question, I think it'd be. I've always been fascinated by some of the gangsters that used to run around with knives in the 1900s and 1920s.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
The amazing adventures of a successful entrepreneur.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
That's a tough one. I heard the previous interviews answers. I would probably say, I'd probably say Hackers. Like I really like Sneakers as a second. Yay! But
in your face, Jeff.
That's But I remember sitting in the cinema and watching Hackers in 1995 and going, I'm not very far away from that at the moment. So it's just a matter of time before I get there.
And you can hack your Gibson. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Ooh. I would say, I've changed my mind. So I was going to say Harrison Ford and Dame Judi Dench, but I think I might, because we can go with previous. Errol Flynn had the looks of he was very successful with women throughout Hollywood. The Australian movie actor from the 40s, I think. And so I think he'd be a good role model. I think he'd be a good if you had a parent that would give you genetics. I think someone that has someone associated with the screen screen time as an actor would be someone that would be a good role model. Whether Errol Flynn was necessarily a good role model from womanizing, I don't think that's the case. So I'll backtrack as far as I can from that.
Was that two parents? I don't know. I think there was three.
What?
We're open-minded.
We're open-minded. I mean, three parents is cool too. I mean, whatever.
It's a blended family.
It's a blended family. Gordon, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Cybersecuritymarket.com. Go check it out. Coming up next, the security news for this week. Stick around. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, subscribe to all the shows on the Security Weekly network. You can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe. All of our shows are available to subscribe individually to the audio or video versions of them. Of course, there's the main feed that has several of our shows all in one feed that you can use your favorite podcast catcher to subscribe to. Go to our YouTube channel, sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on Twitch. Joff Thayer has joined us this evening. Joff, welcome.
It is good to be here. I just hung up on myself, but I'm back.
You're back. That's good. You're back, and you're teaching regular expressions again. You know, Jeff, I was talking to someone about the cybersecurity training market in various aspects, and I said what I love and what I think is a really great thing and super popular is kind of ad hoc, and by ad hoc, not in a negative way in any sense, but ad hoc meaning like not tied to a degree program or certification track, ad hoc training that does a deep dive into a specific topic. And I use your class as an example.
Yes.
I'm like regular, like you want to spend, it's just a day class, right? A full day?
Yeah,
essentially 8 hours.
We do 4 hours.
It was 4 hours. So it's a half day, but like you learn stuff that's applicable to your job, like regular expressions, and you want to just deep dive into something specific, like regular expressions. I think it's great.
Yeah. So some of the feedback that I've had people literally after the first run come back and said, I used it the next day, like right on my job, right at that moment. I mean, it was, really, really well received. So I'm looking forward to doing it again. It is next Tuesday, July 27th. We have a bit.ly link again. I've got bit.ly/JoffReLife. It's regular expressions, your new lifestyle.
I always just go to blackhillsinfosec.com and then I go to there's a training link on there. Right?
Is this a pay what you can show?
Learn. Yeah, there's a learn link, and then you go to training, and then it takes you to like Wild West Hackin' Fest, and that's where I look at all the training that you guys are doing, which I think all of your training is absolutely fantastic. Jeff, I have to ask, what's the kind of, how tall do you need to be to ride the ride for this regex class? Do you have to know Linux? Like you got to be proficient in Linux?
I would say that you have to have some basic Linux knowledge to ride the ride, but what I do is I cover anything from command line utilities all the way through to some PowerShell, a little bit of Python. I basically cover the scope of where you can use regular expressions in your professional life. And so I think everybody, so almost no matter your background and your penchant can probably get something out of it, right? Because regular expressions are so generally applicable, and it's not just InfoSec, right? It spans across the IT community. So it was really well received last time. I think it's going to be good.
Have some familiarity with Linux, a programming language, or Windows, or an operating system first. I'm thinking like my intern. My intern that's learning Linux. Yeah. I think I want him to be a little further along before I send him to this class.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do a little Bash, I do a little grep, I do a little awk, I do a little bit of Python, a little bit of PowerShell. So if you got to be in the industry and have a little knowledge.
He's still learning what those commands are. So I want him to be further along. But I think that's a good discussion we've had about what the kind of minimum requirements are.
Yeah. So it is pay what you can. We have a recommended minimum. It's not zero. The recommended minimum is $25. $25. All right.
Yeah.
You could go to a bar one night and spend $25 easily. And all the way up to, I think it's 125 on the upper end. And if your organization's paying, then do us the favor and give us the 125. But if it's just yourself, feel free to come in with whatever you feel like you can afford, and we'll have a good time.
It's awesome.
Joff, I think you and I have spent more than $25 in that bar. So I was just thinking, we've got
$25 is like maybe a round of drinks with Joff and I.
That would be on the low end.
That gets Joff and I like a margarita that we share lovingly in Las Vegas.
Well, yeah. Just remember, what happens in Reno stays in Reno.
There you go. Reno. It applies to Reno.
So it's Joff Thayer's regular expression life, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Learn to Love Regex.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, any one of those titles could apply, but people have been saying to me, regular expressions, your new lifestyle. Everybody's been saying, I totally want to borrow that. Your new lifestyle is so cool. I want to apply that to other class titles.
It is a lifestyle.
So yeah, it's going to be fun. So
I want to talk about Windows vulnerabilities and exploits. There was at least...
Do you really?
2 or 3. I do. I mean, I actually do.
There's just a few of them around.
There's a few. I want to start what I think is the bigger one. What I think is the more interesting one, and that is Sentinel-1 discovered a 16-year-old bug in a printer driver, ssport.sys, and it's an older printer driver from 2005. And they describe it as like, we were configuring a new printer, and then our team came across the driver, which I think is that's an interesting story in and of itself. But then they discovered vulnerabilities in it, and the rat hole goes deep on this one. 380 different HP and Samsung printer models, and a dozen by Xerox. HP manufactures those printers for Samsung and Xerox.
How'd we get from HP to Xerox?
I was in the process of explaining that. HP.
Please, I'm sorry.
That's okay. HP manufactures those printers, because I had the same question, Jeff. I was like, wait.
Okay.
How does this go across basically? Platforms. If you're Samsung and you're like, hey, I want to make a printer, they go to HP, which I mean, I guess that makes sense, right?
Those driver packages and software packages are all just white labeled and rebranded. So the underlying driver functions are typically built out of an SDK. Yeah. And this one was actually built from a Microsoft SDK and still had some of the default code in it.
That's an old driver.
It's very, very old.
Is what we're saying. And since it's a driver, correct me if I'm wrong, gives you really high privileges if you're able to exploit this flaw.
Kernel level.
And ring zero.
This one,
yep.
This one's interesting because it starts as system, and it starts every single time, whether or not you've installed the software or not.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Is it higher level privilege or is it lower level access to the system?
Depends on which operating system we're talking about. Because in Windows, ring 0 is the lowest level but the highest privilege. I'm going to forget which operating system. It's backwards, right? There's another operating system in architecture where it's completely backwards, right? Where ring 0 is the highest user level and ring 4 or whatever is the lowest.
It's all
level.
just terminology, but the fact is you own it. You compromise a .sys driver, then you're compromising at the kernel level. And you compromising at the kernel level means you have access to all sorts of interesting things.
But what's interesting is whether... I don't have to install this? Like, how does it just, do I have to discover if there's a printer, even Linux does this, right? Like, if there's a printer on my network, there must be a broadcast protocol it's using to say, hey, there's a printer there. And it installs. So
it's in the software package for most of these, and it happens once you start the installation for the software package, whether you finish it or run through it or cancel it. Once the software package loads, the ssport.sys service driver gets configured to the system on initialization. And once that happens, it doesn't matter whether you configure it, whether you're hooking it up via USB wireless, it doesn't matter how you're actually interacting with the printer. This driver gets loaded on boot every single time, no matter how far you went. And that's not even the part of the exploit. That's really bad. Like that's a very old driver that gets loaded no matter what you do. But the real bad part is like the input-output control. This doesn't validate the size for the string copy that comes into the system. And so there's a buffer overflow there that you can overwrite memory space. So there's kind of a lot of things you can do with this. There's not a proof of concept.
ASLR doesn't protect the stack. Is this a stack overflow? Wouldn't it be ASLR protected?
This is a buffer overflow, but it's being loaded at ring 0 by the kernel, and it's a known and signed, or it doesn't even matter if it's a signed driver. This driver gets loaded as part of the boot. And so,
that's an interesting question that, Paul, you were posing. Does ASLR play a role? And I'm going to make a guess here because I actually don't know, but I would guess at kernel level they're probably fixed memory addresses, and it probably does not play a role. Because ASLR more than likely is operating more in user land than at kernel level.
Right, because you don't want a kernel level to crash necessarily if it's randomizing the layout of where it is in memory.
There's things in kernel that need fixed addresses.
Right,
I mean, that's just the nature of it.
Yeah.
And that really depends on your exploit, right? Like this isn't the exploitation piece of this. This is just the driver that gets loaded that has a vulnerability within inside of it. The exploit, when you develop that exploit and how you utilize that buffer overflow and what you do with it, that's when you have to start worrying about your ASLR and like what memory addresses you're playing with and what you're actually doing with it.
Yeah, where you're going to jump back to.
Yeah, where's the weaponization of it?
Yep.
Oh, there's so many possibilities when you're at ring 0, though.
But now the next question from the defender side is, when this updates, is this like when you update Windows, does it come down as a security thing that automatically gets applied, or does it get applied like other drivers where it's like, hey, do you want to install additional drivers as part of your update? Which, I mean, I always do.
No, so this is a user loaded driver, right? So this gets put to the system by the user, like as if you installed a printer driver,
and not coming from Microsoft. Because there's some drivers that come from like even for like mostly my Intel devices. I think because Microsoft and Intel have a good partnership, right? Microsoft will say, hey, there's additional drivers. Like if my Intel architecture or board has Intel devices, like for the network stack or for the Wi-Fi adapter or for the USB bus, I'll get those from Microsoft. But what you're saying, Tyler, is this is a user-loaded driver that is outside of the Windows update process.
Correct. This is the old .sys driver that's specified with inside of the driver, the System32 driver folder, as part of like an installed driver package.
So this is like .sys. .sys goes back to like DOS.
This goes way back.
Pretty much.
Yeah, .sys is way back. My actual open question is going to be how quick the different printer vendors going to deal with it, because there could well be a situation where one vendor's got the right version and another vendor has the wrong version. What if the other vendor with the wrong version gets installed over the right version? Or the patched version, right? And you end up downgrading back to the vulnerable version of the sys driver.
Yeah, and how do you actually... I see Microsoft actually maybe trying to figure out a way to patch this via the
Windows
update process.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, because that could be a real concern. So
I have a different question, and I want to change directions perhaps a little bit and get philosophical, because that's what I do. So this thing's gone undiscovered for 16 years. It now has a CVE number, right? That was in the heading.
Yep. It does. 2021 3438.
Who or what figures out when a vulnerability like this is discovered, if it's exploitable, exploit exists in the wild? And what I'm getting at is, what took you so long to find this? I mean, and is there a philosophical question that should we really? And I'm not trying to pick on these guys, Sentinel-1, but is there a real benefit to finding 15, 16, 20-year-old vulnerabilities if there's no evidence that these things have been previously discovered by bad guys and being used in exploitations, or wouldn't we have already seen it?
You would assume that if it's been found, that it has been abused or looked at. Like most things in System 32, especially drivers, I'm going to say that there are large initiatives in many governments that look at these very critically and find ways to abuse them for access. That's historically proven.
So what I'm hearing you say, Tyler, is you already knew about this one. Old news.
This one I did not, but there are others that are like this that we utilize in, even in exploit kits. There's plenty of ways to abuse. I mean, just look at print spooler, right? Like you start looking at anything with inside of Windows that is old and legacy and backwards compatible. There are things that people have looked at and keep in their war chest for utilization like this. Now, the philosophical question is, do you bring this up to the public so that it gets fixed? Do you keep it quiet so it doesn't get exploited? And what kind of harm are you having in both directions?
Jeff, I think you bring up an interesting point in that when you described and posed that question, right? Like, what is Microsoft's motivation potentially to go discover this vulnerability, to go look at old code that's prevalent on their operating system? They didn't develop this driver, HP did. Right. But what is Microsoft's motivation to do that in an effort to protect their customers? What is HP's motivation to dedicate resources to go, like, hey, like, let's put together a whole team to go look at old drivers? Like how many times do you hear that? Like,
they're not going to do it.
They're not going to do that, right? So
they're relying on security researchers.
Yeah, the burden falls on security researchers and folks like Sentinel-1, who I applaud for pointing out.
Which means there's a ton of this stuff that's undiscovered,
I agree, Jeff.
and we all know it.
Yep.
I mean, there's layers and layers and layers. There's so many sys drivers out there for various things, and this stuff's going to go on and on and on.
I guess that's part of it. If I had an agenda for asking the question, I would agree with you, Jeff. There's probably a ton of stuff like this out there, and you can make the argument. Yes, it's important to find all of them, but is it? Where do you rank it in terms of looking for the vulnerabilities in the new stuff that's coming out there that's much more public facing? That's probably a poor term, but much more on the radar screen of the bad guys that are trying to exploit stuff, much more low hanging fruit, so to speak. My other question, Paul, is going back to our interview last week where we were talking about, I forget his name, I apologize, the firmware guy. Was it Scott?
Yeah, Scott Shefferman from Eclipsium.
Where do you place in order of importance, less than well documented required things you should be doing to keeping your systems upgraded? Hardware, firmware, device drivers, software, operating system. This just seems like another layer that we don't all. I never ask a client about their drivers or anything.
There's much more important things to deal with, right? Like, people are not getting the fundamentals right at a very bare minimum, where we're removing local admin, we're doing good password sanitization, we're doing just basics. So getting them focused on things where you're doing hardware analysis, you're leaving that to companies that are having to rely on things like hypervisor, like IBM Cloud or Azure Cloud. Like, they have to rely on the ability for their hardware to be secure in order to support something like GovCloud. So I don't think that falls under the normal purview of even larger mature corporations that are trying to do security right. That's kind of outside of their purview. There's much more important threats to kind of deal with. And Microsoft's doing a good job with new code, so it's not necessarily all the new code. It's the legacy stuff that's still getting integrated, the pipeline and the way they test old code and the ability for the code moving forward into base operating systems. They've downsized a lot of the people that were doing that code analysis on legacy things. So it's kind of moved to the new CDIC pipeline where it's all the new code. They're doing automated and AI scanning of that new code, but we still have this legacy stuff that is not getting so much visibility unless it's by security researchers.
Yeah, I think there needs to be less focus on what the threat or vulnerability is versus what the impact is, right? And I think we kind of get hung up on what the latest trend is. Like, we need to protect ourselves
Exactly
against ransomware.
Right.
Ransomware is the impact. Ransomware is not the issue. It's not the vector
cause.
that we need to be focused on. What is the prioritizing those vectors and not being well, I need to secure the operating system, the applications, but I need to secure what is going to lead to the most impactful things against my organizations. I think in some organizations, Jeff, that could be drivers and firmware level things. For sure.
So, do we know what the score is of this CVE, the CVSS score?
There were so many this week. I think it was an 8.
I'll look it up while we're talking.
I think it's 8.8.
8.8. Was this an 8.8
guy, right? Yeah. But I think Paul's exactly right. I had a call with a customer exactly along those lines this week, and they started out like doing the normal, like, oh, ransomware is in the media, and I was like, okay, but let's focus on what exactly is getting that ransomware into your environment and what's spreading it, and let's have that discussion, and you have to redirect them into that discussion to talk about the fundamentals and talk about the basic security hygiene that will prevent them from being in the news and prevent them from being involved in a ransomware attack. Right?
Yeah, there was another Microsoft vulnerability, 2021-31956, exploiting the Windows kernel NTFS with WNF. This seems like
interesting.
Something that was disclosed previously by Kaspersky, and this researcher was like, well, Kaspersky developed the exploit for it, but didn't publicly release it, which is fine. But they were like, based on what was published, they went through this lengthy blog post of here's how I would exploit it, right? And I think this is a factor to looking at your overall risk posture as an organization and going, oh, yeah, someone can exploit this. So this blog post explains that based on the information that was out there, how could I, reading from the blog author's voice, right? How could I exploit this? And walks you through how to do that, which could change the impact, could change the likelihood and probability that this would happen in your environment.
Yeah, so I find this one really, really fascinating because I've actually been aware of WNF vulnerabilities for probably about 12 months now, probably way before they became public. We did a little bit of work on it.
And this is the Windows Notification Framework.
Yeah, facility, I think they call it, Windows Notification Facility.
The blog post says Windows Notification Framework, WNF, used
framework. You're right.
Used by the in-the-wild attackers to enable novel exploit primitives. Is how it's described.
Yeah, so there's all, as usual with the Windows operating system, there's whole subsystems that people spend time exploring.
Yeah.
That to the ordinary, regular day-to-day operations, people just not aware of, right? And this Windows Notification Framework is one of those that has a lot of attack surface to it. That it's just not evident in day-to-day use exactly what's going on, and it's not really a surprise that there's going to be some public exploits coming out around it, to at least to my knowledge, anyway.
The amount of detail in this post is ridiculous. It's amazing,
and this is just part one.
And it is labeled as part
it's going to
one.
keep on coming out. Yeah.
And I had not heard of the Windows Notification Framework, and how it ties into the file system is just amazing. But this blog post, go read this blog post. It says it's a 32-minute read. I love these things that estimate how long.
More like an hour.
Yeah, you're
I was going to say
not
an hour and a half trying to understand what he was.
Maybe if you're developing in this space, or you work for Microsoft and were responsible for that, you could read it in 30 minutes. But the rest of us is going to take a much longer time to digest.
Hour and a half,
at least.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So this is a very fascinating area. There's going to be, I think, a lot that will come out over time as people unwind this and start to really dig in.
Oh, speaking of unwinding the print spooler vulnerability. We've got a new
segue,
a new unpatched, and this came from a researcher at Dragos. Jacob Baines, for identifying this issue. CVE 2021-34481 is another. This looks like a privilege escalation vulnerability in the Windows print spooler, and this is par for the course, right? Whenever you have one vulnerability in something like a print spooler, which we can go back to Stuxnet and talk about the other print spooler vulnerabilities. Then you get the print, what do they call it? Print nightmare is what we're calling it now.
Print nightmare, yeah.
Print nightmare V1, 2, 3, or 4.
And then
volume 4.
Once we start on, for pun intended, unraveling the print spooler even more, we find more and more vulnerabilities. Which is, I mean, this is in the 16 years of doing this show now, right? Par for the course. I mean, this is like history repeating itself.
Yeah, these ones are kind of scary though, because they're incomplete patches, and there's no patch in sight for some of these. They just can't get them out fast enough, and some of them break general functionality. So
like they're patching the patch, right? There's patches that patch the original vulnerability. Then there's a patch that patches the patch, and then there's a patch that patches like the offshoot of the vulnerability.
Well, like Nightmare Hive, like the other new one with being able to read the SAM and system hives as a regular user, right? Like there's different versions of update releases depending on when you installed or what media you installed from, and whether you got the latest update from the nightly release or from your long-term support agreement. Like that mattered as far as whether or not you were patched, and it's really hard to determine whether or not you're still vulnerable.
And that's not frightening at all, right? I mean, geez.
So silly question leading to a soapbox moment. This Windows print spooler, you would think that people are only going to use it or need to have it installed if they're actually connected to a printer and want to actually print something, correct?
No.
So here's my soapbox moment, because I see this all the time with customers looking for secure configurations and hardening documents and guidelines, and you get to the Windows and it's pretty much a stock install. It's not plug and play like it was 15, 20 years ago, because Windows 10 is, pretty secure out of the box. But it would be nice if we could package this up in a way as sort of evidence that this is a reason why you should go through and remove stuff that's just part of the Windows install package that you're not using. You don't need it. Get rid of it.
I think Microsoft has to do a better job of allowing us to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They really there tends to be a whole lot of stuff that's still like thrown into the barrel, and we need to be able to be a little bit more selective. And print spooler would be one of those.
That is very true.
Yeah, I'm picking on Microsoft here, but I also believe Linux and Mac OS are also, every operating system is guilty of this, especially when it comes to printers. Because users just want printers to work. And I think even open source operating systems are shipping this stuff so that printers just work. And a lot of this stuff is enabled by default, right? Yeah. And hard to rip it out. Hard to say, I want to download an Ubuntu without printer support. When you download Ubuntu 20.04 today, the desktop version, it ships with printer support. When I bring it up for the first time on my network, I get a notification. It's like, hey, you got a printer on your network.
Well, users, I'm not printing users are always going to want to print.
Yeah,
right? Like even businesses.
Right.
Like there's no way around printing. Printing is a function of business, and interoperability and the ability for an OS to function for general consumers is always going to be a thing. Even if you don't have printers on the network, right? Like something like print to PDF. That's a function built into Office. That's a function built into your operating system as a general function. That requires spoolers. So you can't just go and disable this. It's not quite that simple. There's a lot to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but don't forget, we've also got the thing that, remember when we first were starting with this stuff, you had to go find all the drivers and everything from whether it was your keyboard to
remember? It was awful.
And now, the OSs come with drivers that will work with most or generic, and then you can load a vendor-specific one if you even need it. So that's why they're getting fatter, and they got all that stuff thrown in, so things just work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was painful to have to find and update drivers. I mean, it flat out sucked, but it was a bit more of a secure space.
But then you had nefarious drivers because you were always looking at like, what was it, driver detector or one of the others that was finding like all these obscure drivers.
You're taking me back to
side-loaded drivers.
Windows 98 days, right? You had to go install Windows 98 on someone's workstation, and they had even a printer. XP. Then you had to go Google. Like, was there even Google? Like, you had to go find the driver. Jeff, to your point, it might not be Google.
It was Alta Vista, probably.
Yeah, to go find that driver and install that driver. And I think that was a pain point for many users. Where, Lee, to your point, they're bundled in the OS now, so it's a better user experience. And here we are with all these printer vulnerabilities.
No, so maybe for specifically these printer spooler and printer driver issues, printing is a vital thing, but it's not. I mean, you can do it over the network and stuff like that. But is there a way to like take the whole? I don't know what Microsoft calls it. Is it a bundle? Is it a package of all the print drivers that are somehow contained in the operating system? And can you just disable them all in one swell foop?
So there's a lot of ways to harden like Windows.
That's a swell
Windows.
Tyler, we want a swell foop of print. I know you. Your family your family did printers or something, right? Like you've got a lot of experience with printers.
Spent a lot of time with printers, PPDs, like all the drivers over decades. And honestly, like we're at a point where you can harden Windows. Windows is very, very configurable, and you can do that from GPO, from administration level. Like this is not an unsolved problem. There's STIGs, there's configuration states, you could even go all the way down to like something like a Pixie boot with answer files, right? Like you can go old school, and you can be very granular at how you set up your Windows, but that takes effort. And we go back to security conundrum of things that are hard to do and take time. Only the very, very mature are doing those for very specific reasons. And even that, there may be loopholes, but something like a STIG or a configuration hardening guide where you're following that, you may be better off because you've disabled a lot of this. That doesn't mean you're out of the woods, but you're likely better off direction.
Though. Yeah, but I'd put that on the operating system vendors to go, when you install it, like, do you want printer support, right? Like, let's use an easier example. When you install Ubuntu, it doesn't come with OpenSSH server by default. When you install Ubuntu server, it asks you, like, hey, do you want to install an OpenSSH server on it or not? I also want the option to say, like, do you want printer support? Like,
you do have that ability when you're doing it for a large organization as part of how they've designed Windows to be deployed. If you're just doing it like off a default installation media, then you're not doing that. But if you're doing it how Microsoft's designed it to be deployed large scale and highly configured, and you do the configurations, then you have all that granular control, and a lot of places do that.
Right. But a lot of places don't remove the printer support because they don't want to deal with the support that accompanies that.
Here's a question for you, Paul. Which do you think is more secure? The old model where you had to compile all your loadable modules into the kernel. There wasn't a dynamic loader, or like the new model that Apple's going down, where there are no loadable kernel modules. They're loadable modules, but they can't load in the kernel anymore. So they can't run with scripting 0.
I think the most secure model, Lee, is one that lets you choose which functionality gets built in. Right, but then when the question is like, what are the right questions to ask and allow you to configure, right? Like how granular do you want to go? Right?
But you're also the 1%, even like IT people, right? Like you're talking about a demographic of security focused and IT people with a long history of experience versus the demographic of people that they sell to, which is going to be who they're building the product towards. And that's going to be the least friction point for long term. Yeah, there's vulnerabilities, but that's kind of cost of doing business, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a business risk case.
Who's going to choose the Windows install that lets me say, like, I want SMB or I don't. I want printer functionality or I don't, right? But if I've got a Windows PC and it's serving a specific purpose, for example, I just want to play games. Like, do I even need the SMB subsystem? Do I even need the print spooler? I don't. But the option doesn't easily exist to let me exclude those options. Maybe we'll see a day where it does, but I still
there's so
think
much integration between like the kernel and like how
it's hard
Windows
to rip that
operates
stuff
at
apart.
NTFS and SMB, like pipes and how
even in Linux and Mac
play.
OS, man, that stuff is hard to separate. It really is to have that truly modular experience. So in any case, we got really down a rabbit hole on that one.
Yeah, we did.
Let's talk about
Microsoft cracks down on domains.
Dig out.
Let's keep on the Microsoft theme. Keep on the keep beating the Microsoft drum. And I'm not bashing Microsoft in any. In fact, in this story, I chose to defend Microsoft, quite frankly, because my story number 7 is Microsoft. I think you might have had the story too, Lee, right? Is Microsoft a national security threat? I mean, I don't buy it. Regardless of what operating system you have, you're just as vulnerable. In the article very quickly goes into like, hey, poses the question, is Microsoft a national security threat? And they ask basically one question to prove or disprove that point is, well, is Microsoft more attacked and more vulnerable because it's more popular or not? And they spend several pages debating that point.
They were on the debate team. I know they were.
They were on the debate team, and they're debating the same point, just in like using different like English phrases to say the same thing. So like 3/4 of the article probably could have been consolidated into like one paragraph. They get to the end and they say organizations rely on Windows will have a hell of a time migrating away from Windows and the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem, which means that they're naturally going to drag their toes. The bigger they are, the slower any attempt at a migration will go. So they're talking about like, do you move off Microsoft's platform or not? And they're like, maybe this means that there's plenty of time for those that can easily migrate away from the madness and insecurity of Microsoft as a means of sheltering themselves from a barrage of attacks. Like they're just getting into like the operating system wars. And I'm like, that's me, it boils down to Apple hides their vulnerabilities the best they can. No one wants to take the time to find and disclose a big percentage of all those Linux vulnerabilities. Qualys is making a go at it, which I think is cool. And then you've got Microsoft, which is the largest install base. Therefore, it's the most attacked and most vulnerable. And there's lots of ways you could measure this too.
Secure, though. Like I would argue it has the most security features, the most configuration, and if done properly, it will stand up against any one of those. The problem they didn't take into account was they're definitely not an operations person. You want to migrate off of Microsoft. Like, tell me how you do that enterprise-wide and manage at scale without introducing all the same vulnerabilities into like a Mac shop with local administration, SSH keys. Like you can't orchestrate.
You get in the jump cloud, you get in the AWS, you got to find a directory service.
There's just no way.
You might have a chance to do that in 1984, but you can't do that in 2021. There's no way.
That's right. That's right. Look, I would make the argument that Paul made. I mean, Microsoft.
Is that me in your background? What is going on
behind me? Oh my god! I mean, Microsoft's been through the pain, right? Time tested. They've done what a few others have done, right? So are they a national security threat? Absolutely not. In fact, I would say that they're more of an asset in that respect because they've done the work, right?
Yeah.
So I disagree with all of you, and I agree with all of you, but it all boils down to the definition of the term threat. I think you guys are having a knee-jerk reaction to. We've just had a lengthy discussion about 2 vulnerabilities that Microsoft are present in Microsoft systems. If you keep in mind the risk equation, where risk is a measurement of the likelihood of something bad happening, and it's based on threats, vulnerabilities, and the security countermeasures that you do to minimize the impact of the threats and the vulnerabilities. Threats are more or less a constant. Vulnerabilities are essentially, at least originally intended, the variable. You try to drive down the vulnerabilities. It is more and more constant these days. I agree with you. But in terms of the way I learned the risk equation, the threats are the bad guys. They're the things that want to do bad things to you. It's sort of morphed into the bad things that can happen, because it's somewhat automated, and it can be things, not just people at this point. So in that context, yes, Microsoft, because of its prevalence in terms of its ubiquitous.
But what you're
so
saying,
many
Jeff, is
organizations.
Microsoft's vulnerabilities could be the threat to national security. Microsoft itself is not the threat to national security. That would mean that Microsoft is attacking the nation, right?
You have a computer that's a threat. I don't care what make or model it is. It's a threat. You're putting data. You're conducting business using some sort of technology. That in and of itself is a threat. Something bad could happen using that piece of technology. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, the computer's not the threat. It's the person that wants to do bad things with it that's the threat.
By market share, yeah, they're the most utilized computer system. They're the most heavily adopted. They're what hold the data.
Right.
But they also have the capability to have visibility where the other ones do not. The premise is like you should migrate off because the other ones are less attacked.
I disagree with that premise. You have threats, you acknowledge them, and you do something about it. In this case, you as a company, Microsoft has a program for discovering vulnerabilities and disclosing vulnerabilities, and they have bug bounty programs, and they have their Patch Tuesday, and they've come light years in producing secure operating systems out of the box, despite what we say every week. But we acknowledge that, but still they're a target for the bad guys to find more vulnerabilities and ways to exploit to get some ultimate outcome, which is what you're worried about as an organization: the risk of loss of data, the risk of an impact to your business, the risk of your ability to conduct business in the case of ransomware. So all I'm saying is, as an industry, we don't really understand this terminology very well, and it overlaps in our minds a lot. I had an email. I might have mentioned this on the show last week. I apologize if I did, but I had an email from some marketing firm wanting me to talk to their CEO because their product eliminates risk. And I'm like, well, risk is not something you eliminate. It's a measurement.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we talk about the different operating systems, I think we have stories to kind of back up some of our hypotheses that Microsoft has done a really good job in helping secure things, taking down the Cyrillic characters and domain names and stuff like that, right? That Linux is this platform where you have to have talented people that can go find all these vulnerabilities in the code. That doesn't make Linux any more or less secure. It's just a whole bunch of other software that needs to be secured. And you've got Apple that very much... I mean, you could look back in the history in the beginnings of this show, and we've covered where they're just sweeping shit under the rug all the time, and we've got stories that back up all those points.
I think that's going to change in the very near future with a lot of the ransomware. So all of the ransomware has now adopted a couple new kits as part of the OS X or Mac OS integration and capabilities. Like we have tons of kits. We have the capability to do all the same things we do on Windows. It just they're not as prevalent, so we use them when we need them. And ransomware is starting to see that a lot of shops are adopting that and moving, high risk or high asset portions of their development cycle, maybe their marketing, all of those places that are integral parts of their business. Now they're going to start seeing ransomware on the Macs, and that's just hasn't hit the media yet. So there's not as many, there's not as much publicity around that.
Well, let's talk Linux for a moment. Qualys researchers, who we've had on the show multiple times talking about their research, they're doing a fantastic job. I applaud their efforts. I love when they release new things. I also love that one of the things they disclosed before we get into Sequoia was a denial of service vulnerability in Systemd. And that's what you get for using Systemd rather than System 5 init. Joff, I knew you guys would appreciate that statement. I've been waiting all night to just drop that bomb.
It's beautiful. By the way, Lee's background is absolutely fantastic. But look,
I had to bring out the big gun.
There you go.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, bring out the big guns. But we all had trouble moving to away from the System 5 init, right? Yep. Because that was predictable, it was manageable, et cetera, et cetera. but the boot process in Linux was horribly sequential, right?
Yes,
and
was.
we had
no, you're right. It
right?
was. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some benefits to systemd. I agree.
Yeah,
agree.
there are. There definitely are. Hey,
but anyway, that was a denial of service, a strictly denial of service vulnerability. I do link to it in the show notes. The one that I find it's actually really fascinating to read through this kind of, I'm fascinated with the thought process, like that you would analyze, Qualys team analyzed code and was like, if I create a directory structure whose total path length exceeds 1 gigabyte, that's my first step to executing this local privilege escalation vulnerability. Like, think about that for a moment as to how many bytes a directory takes up and to create a directory structure that is 1 gigabyte in size. Like, that is amazing in and of itself. In doing that, the unprivileged attacker can then go on to, it's a multi-stage attack, right? A 10-byte string / deleted to an offset of exactly, what is it, negative 2 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes to 10. There's the whole, gets into
sounds like a classic integer overflow issue.
I don't know if it was a buffer overflow in vmalloc is what they found. Uncontrolled out of bounds write, and then basically full root privileges. They've got a demo, they basically compiled some C code that automates all this exploit. It works on Ubuntu 2004, 2010, Ubuntu 2104, Debian 11, all the latest Linux distributions.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And Sequoia, I think, is great as a great name, because they're creating a really big forest, like a directory tree.
Exactly.
Which, very aptly named.
Well, so it actually was something I was going to point out just in the last story, and it's illustrative here as well. And that is something that the community could get away with for a long time, was to say that the BSDs and the Linuxes were more secure, but the little hidden secret was they offered less functionality. And of course, if you decrease the operational attack surface, of course they're going to be mitigating risk and be more secure, right? But when you're an operating system out there,
yeah, but that's not the case. I mean,
not the case anymore.
It was a farce.
Right.
It was a farce for us to believe that millions and millions and millions of line of C code was more secure than what Microsoft or Apple or anyone else was putting out, right? How it doesn't matter. Once you reach that millions of lines of code, there's going to be vulnerabilities. And many people stood up on their soapboxes and said, well, Linux is more secure. Apple's more secure. I'm like, dude, no, it's not. That's a farce. And if you were in the know, even 10, 15 years ago, I had very smart people tell me, dude, Linux has so many holes that just aren't being disclosed. And look, props. I mean, Qualys is a sponsor. Independent of that, props to them for going, no, it's not secure. And guess what? We'll help you find those flaws, and we're going to report them and get some of these fixed. That's pretty cool. We need more people like Qualys helping us with this, because even the talented team at Qualys can't point out all these flaws, discover them, and disclose them in a reasonable amount of time. Forget it.
Well, here's my contention, Paul. And it's not a farce. It was a marketing campaign.
Yeah, it was. It was come use Linux. It's more secure, right? It was totally a marketing. Absolutely.
And I remember those days, and I didn't believe it for a minute. I knew that nobody was looking at it because there was that much Linux in the world, and there was this much Windows. So it was just. That's just good economic sense from the bad guy perspective.
Agreed.
You astutely observe that vulnerabilities are more or less a constant these days in the sense of a risk equation. I absolutely agree with that. I would go so far as to say our whole industry needs to get over this hunt for vulnerabilities and acknowledge that threats exist, acknowledge that vulnerabilities are more or less a constant. They're not going away. We're never getting to the point where everything is completely secure in the sense that we discover no more vulnerabilities. What's left in the equation? What we call security. what is that if it's not all this stuff that we do trying to run down and discover and detect and patch vulnerabilities or detect the threats and have the threat intelligence agents and threat this, threat that, and threat the other.
Yeah, or architect to mitigate, right? Architect to mitigate.
You can't. I mean, if there's anything we've learned up until this point, is you can't trust the software that's running on your device. I think that's why, largely incorrectly, but right or wrong or indifferent, zero trust is a thing, because I think we're quickly realizing that we can't trust the software that we're running on our devices because, like I said, like vulnerabilities are a constant. They always have been. I mean, Jeff and I worked for a vulnerability vendor. There's one thing we could say is that vulnerabilities are a constant. There's research teams in all the major vulnerability companies. They're just finding and writing checks for vulnerabilities. It's a constant. What that means is you can't trust your software. So what do you do? I think it's why we're messaging on zero trust.
Well, and I had a couple articles. One, zero trust is actually in the title, how data discovery and zero trust can help defend against a data breach. The other one that I chuckled over was trust no one should be our new security motto. And I'm like, really? That's new?
No, that was an X-File. I used to have the poster from the X-Files with the UFO, right? And it said, trust no one.
It predates the X-Files.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it does.
But, go ahead, Lee.
So I'm just starting to skim this, and I'm like, they're saying companies aren't sharing. Well, how much? Yeah, that's valid. Getting people to share and talk and trade information, and particularly when they've been had, is something that's really need to be addressed.
But the problem is there's always a balance there. Like, no matter how much we agree that trust, like zero trust, is where we want to get, there always has to be functionality. We will always have to inherently, like, at least in my lifetime, we're always going to have to inherently trust certain things, certain software, certain drivers, certain pieces of hardware, certain functionality in order to
firmware.
Function.
You missed last week, Tyler. You got to trust them.
It's annoying. It's annoying, right? So I manage a lot of Linux systems, not a lot, a fair number of Linux systems, I should say, and I want to make sure that they're patched and up to date. And to do that, I have to use
trust the update.
I have to use the apt command, right? And the update, I have to trust that process at the end of the day, and that's, to me,
functionality and
that's
the ability
the scariest
to utilize
thing.
Your stuff. There's always going to be a balance.
I would venture to say I trust the Windows update process more so than I trust the Linux update apt process, to be quite honest with you, because Microsoft protects.
I'd agree with that
right?
assessment.
Microsoft protects that more so than many other things in this world. When we talk about software and companies and what they protect and trust, Microsoft protects that update process. I get a little leery because there's so many distributions, so many people, a loosely kind of formed organization. I don't think they put as much attention and focus on that trust level to, like, what code goes into the apt binary, what code runs the servers where I'm pulling these packages from. It's dicey.
Well, do you remember back when, to get like the source code for SunOS, it cost like $20,000 or $40,000?
I remember when it was 6 figures.
Yeah, those are the early days.
Unless NSA wasn't getting a discount.
They probably
not. Probably not.
I will say at that time we got the educational pricing. We had the source for
BSD. There was educational pricing for the software. Yep.
Well, if the government could pay more, I'm sure they did. I had never heard a firm number, but I always.
But wait, Lee, hold on. Lee, where were you going with that?
Point, Lee?
Yeah, I want
So
to know.
my point was, back then, the source for the operating systems weren't easily available, and so discovering vulnerabilities like this was really difficult unless you had the source and you had all the agreements that were, how you were and weren't supposed to use it. I'm remembering back to, we had BSD 4.2 systems that somebody had hand ported all of the NFS routines to, and then added security to them. They were looking through them and said, "Oh my God, it doesn't check what network you're trying to do NFS from. We'll add some config in for that." And I was just thinking about that, reading what Wallace had done, is you're going through this source. If you actually
the source, but I don't know. I think
who has time for that now?
Yeah,
right?
I think that depends on the person, the methodology. I think some people and processes lend itself to, yeah, cool, I got the source, I can be effective. There's other processes and people that can be equally as effective without the source. I don't
this
think
is a good use case where ML and AI like should start to fill in the gap to cover 80%, and then you have the creative 20%.
Can you mute that, man?
That's what it's there for. Like, we need to utilize it in a more efficient manner, but that only covers 80%. We're always going to have that 20% that is going to require creative people to look at those slashes at the code, at the nuances, and dig in very, very deeply. But
and if you look at what Qualys has done, though, I think that's where your AI and ML falls down, because they're chaining multiple vulnerabilities together.
Yep.
I don't think AI and ML is quite there.
But it should cover. No, it's not going to be, and I don't think it ever. At least in my lifetime, it's not going to. But it should be covering that 80%. This is the 20%.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about the basics and covering the
I don't know
code
if it's
base.
80-20. Maybe 50-50.
50-50?
Maybe 50. I'd go with 50. I'd be on board with 50-50.
Yeah, I mean, that really depends on your data sets, right? Like, again,
I'm thinking 49-51.
There you go.
Just to be ornery.
Okay. We have a lot of good stories. Let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
Like, I don't know about this homoglyph domains. Like, I've always heard it like doppelgangers, but Microsoft cracks down on homoglyph domains.
So my question on this one, I have my own kind of theories on this, but brand monitoring tools should be able to identify typo squatting domains that are using homoglyph characters. No, I would think that's a pretty easy. We can solve this with code and automate. This is where I would say most of the time you can solve this.
Don't say it.
Code. Dare I say AI and ML? Like you could solve this.
This is solved. This is solved, but no one's using it. That's the problem. Like, even major corporations and domains, like big names, are like just starting to get into this brand, because it's got a different label. It's brand and market analysis, or it's brand protection.
It's a security thing, though. It's a security thing, because
it's a security thing. But
the clip is from the article is the attackers hijacked legitimate Office 365 email communications to send an impersonation email from a homoglyph domain that had a single letter changed, convinced the victim that the message came from a trusted source, claimed that they were the CFO, to put a hold on the account and ask for payment. I mean, this is like
it's like the most
it's like the most basic phishing attack. But the thing that made it believable was the character in the domain.
Yeah, most firewalls look at that. Most categorizations and analyze that, and they don't let it in. It's when you're starting to talk about vendors and third party or supply chains. Like, usually this is against another company from a trusted domain, right?
Microsoft should not have had to take down these 20 domains, because this is a solvable problem, is what I'm hearing.
It is. Yeah. I'm glad that Microsoft's doing it, because not many companies are monitoring it. Like we should have a technical segment that outlines the different products that are available for brand protection and doppelganger protection. Like, that seems like a great segment. I've had.
Do we need homoglyph characters in domains, period? Can't we just can't we solve this by just banning that?
No.
No, you can't.
That's what non-homoglyph characters are. Homoglyphs are like you replace an L with a capital I. Yeah. It's similar looking character. If you had UTF-8 characters in it, that'd be more interesting. But for just regular Latin characters, you can just do letter substitution, so visually it looks the same.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, Lee, because we did use the UTF stuff for a while, but then the browser vendors started displaying the full domain name. You could use Punicode and get away with that for a little while, where you would put the the little dot underneath the O, and it was amazing what you could get away with. But that doesn't work so much. Homoglyphs is still an issue.
And homoglyphs are like
an attack strategy. We use it all the time. I mean, I'll still use it, and you can defeat 2FA with it as well, because you can reverse proxy in front of their authentication mechanisms that are cloud facing and take the traffic through there. You can capture not only the credential, you can capture the 2FA as well, and then you have a window of actual access to the organization. So it is a serious issue.
Yeah,
Dimitri says it's solvable. So
I mean, there's a ton of products out there.
Yep, I trust Dimitri too.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I don't disagree that we can't write tools to detect this. It's just you can't
people
ban
aren't
the
using them. Well,
I mean, isn't it as simple? Isn't it as simple as there a different ASCII character and
yeah, I mean, you just
the
go through
alphabet's within a range of ASCII?
Yeah, but what if your domain name has a 1 in it, right? Like that's a valid domain. You put a 1 in it, and it's hard to distinguish. Yeah, you're distinguishing between whether or not something's valid or not valid, and that may be valid for certain places. The problem really is that people or companies are not utilizing the tools that are out there to monitor this. And even if they are, it's usually the people that they're attacking, it's coming from a vendor. So if their vendor is not monitoring, then they're still at risk. They're the ones that are being attacked by a vendor doppelganger.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if you limit it to ASCII, you still have the problem, and you still need to monitor. To Tyler's point, Pegasus has made the news.
I knew you were going to go there.
Right, but the interesting thing, I mean, Pegasus is a thing, right? Is it the NCO group? The Israeli firm? Is it NCO? Yeah. Did I say that right? NSO group, right? Makes the spyware that years ago was used to spy on journalists, and I would imagine that Israeli government, right, is using to protect its country, right, spy on its enemies, which makes sense. I listened to a lot of podcasts lately, about not cybersecurity related, right, but the conflicts that Israel is in a constant battle with. It makes sense that they would want this technology to be able to protect their country, and I don't fault them for that in any way. But the Pegasus software has been used to spy on journalists, but this is a malware package, right? It's got to get on the phone itself, and there are what the media is calling zero-click exploits that allow this on Android and iOS, from what I understand. And these are essentially from my take on this is zero-day flaws, which in Android wouldn't be totally surprising, but in iOS is kind of surprising, as the walled garden has failed in this sense that there are basically ODays out there for iOS that bypass all the protections that Apple has put in place, that are allowing bad actors to install Pegasus software, which, if you read my kind of clip from the article, is really scary. Copies call histories, text messages, calendar entries, contacts. Camera and phone microphones are compromised to eavesdrop and even track movements and steal messages from end-to-end encrypted chats, right? Because at the end of the day, I think people have a misconception. Signal, for example. Signal is amazing.
Doesn't work?
Signal is amazing. They implemented an amazing crypto system. I can't pretend to explain that to you, but if you notice, if you open the Signal app on your phone, you can read your messages, which means if you've got malware on your phone, conceivably they could probably do the same thing if they have low-level access to your phone. Yeah.
Who'd have thought that?
Right. Like after you decrypt a message, let's put it in Jeff, in your like after you decrypt a message, if you can see that, conceivably others could as well, depending on your protections.
Well, it's before or after. Technically, you can attack. There's two ends to the encrypted communication path.
That's right. That's right.
So it's really
Jeff and I have been
like
saying
whoever
this for
has
years.
the key.
Jeff and I laugh about this all the time because everybody gets into the great encryption debate, right?
Who cares?
Governments want to backdoor it. Oh my God, encryption's bad. It allows criminals to do things. Bullshit. When you get on the end device, it's unencrypted. It's always going to be unencrypted somewhere. Right. And it's usually right on the end device.
Either you have the key or you're looking at it after the key has decrypted it, right? I mean, that's really... Those are the constants in encryption, right? You're most often not attacking the algorithm. You're attacking the key management, or...
You almost never attack the algorithm. Almost never.
I can remember a PCI kind of related thing, right? You could have really good encryption. However, if the operating system was vulnerable and it was a point-of-sale device, and I could put malware on that point-of-sale device that was capturing the screen, and the credit card number was appearing in clear text on the screen so someone could see it. If I can capture the screen, I can see the credit card number. I actually did that in a pen test years ago.
Which is why one of the PCI requirements is don't display the whole number.
Right. And they were obviously not PCI compliant at the time, which was a finding, of course.
Well, I mean, you might be able to remember the days when the whole number was printed on a receipt.
Yeah.
I remember those days, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the PCI came out and said you can print the first 6 or the last 4. And I remember shortly thereafter that I started getting receipts where there was the last 4 on one receipt visible, and on another receipt it was the first 6 that they were allowing, which really reduced. Yeah. Anyway,
reducing your key space.
Yes.
But the Pegasus thing, I mean, the coverage was interesting because journalists are the ones that were largely being attacked. So the Guardian was all over this story. Had some good articles on it.
Another one I thought was
it's
interesting.
A tool.
Sorry, Tyler.
No, I'm just, everyone gets all up in arms about these tools. Like, there are all kinds of tools like this. Like, you can spy on your ex, you can monitor your kids, you can do all of these capabilities with a bazillion
Pop quiz,
tools.
Tyler. Is it a threat or is it a vulnerability? Or is it a risk?
It's a threat.
It's a threat. I would agree.
Very good.
Yep.
God,
So,
man.
I mean,
Somebody say PCI before I have to drink.
Where do you want to go next?
I have one article that I thought it was kind of humorous, and I'm sure it's a very serious story, but China is getting ready to publish their equivalent of GDPR.
Oh, that is interesting.
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding.
I mean, that's really just marketing, in my opinion. I mean, right? Like when you have countries like North Korea,
personal information
is it just bragging?
law.
Is it just bragging?
There's a hierarchy, right? Like Cuba, North Korea, China. Like they're different.
It's funny that it's named Pipple, like kind of like the database of people.
Yeah, like that's
people. That's how they pronounce it.
They're going to have a one-line document. We will continue doing what we've always done.
Yeah, but I think it's a lot of it's propaganda at the end of the day, right? When we talk about communist countries, I think this reeks of propaganda, right? Like trying to make the people feel good, but doing just the opposite to destroy their privacy on the back end. And I think that's really a kind of a theme that we've seen in many communist countries. There are some great podcasts out there. In fact, we had Jack on last week. Jack did a great interview with someone who defected from North Korea. He also is how I found out about the Jordan Harbinger show. And Jordan is interviewing a 2-part interview series with someone who infiltrated North Korea from Denmark. There's like a group in Denmark that sympathizes with North Korea in like a fan, like they're basically a fan club for North Korea. And he kind of posed as being part of this group and collected intelligence and brought he was basically a mole and talks about some very scary experiences. Like,
there's no way to live your life. That's a
for the record. People extends an existing law called the Personal Information Security Specification, or PIS.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. That's so appropriate.
My estimation not a whole lot of research I've done. They're not all about privacy, right? And I want to so Jordan's doing this interview, and the person he's interviewing is like, so I stayed at a hotel, went for a walk on the beach, and like reached a certain point where I saw some people fishing, and I wanted to go towards them, and someone like came out of nowhere and said, "No, so you have to go back to your hotel." That person had been following them, walking in the woods like the entire time. Like, these countries are not about privacy in any capacity.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
moving on.
Next story. I want to talk about, we've talked about this in many different ways over the years, but it just happens to manifest itself in SonicWall warning of an imminent ransomware campaign targeting its end-of-life equipment. And so, if you don't want ransomware, your choices are upgrade your device or, if you can't upgrade your device, then you have to pay us to go to the next revision of the hardware so that you can upgrade your device. Or their recommendation, I shit you not, the effective end-of-life devices with the 8X firmware are past temporary mitigations. Continued use of this firmware or end-of-life devices is an active security risk, and their recommendations are to remove those devices from the network. SonicWall is recommending that they disconnect devices immediately. That's what they say. So I got a firewall, like it's end of life, and if I don't want ransomware, I got to just take it out of service. Like, whoa, wait. What if that's my firewall or my VPN? Like, what? So I just have to rip the device out.
I have mixed feelings about this because you know it's a real problem, right? I mean, you've got dated hardware, you're writing software for the current generation, you've got this, legacy issue. Somewhere as a company you have to draw the line.
Yeah. But somewhere you have to take care of your customer's job. So I interviewed a customer of Checkpoint, and he was like, I wanted this feature, and they were like, that's in the next revision. Like, let's use 8 and 9. I'm on version 8. The feature's in version 9. And he's like, no. My 200 people at my call center are all working remotely. They are not here in the office, and they're all using version 8 to get into the office. Therefore, you will port this feature to version 8. And Checkpoint said, okay, yes, we'll do that. And I think this is a disservice to smaller businesses, which SonicWall appeals to, where they're not going to make that call, right? You're not going to have that much influence because you're not spending that much money with the company, which is awful, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the better choice I think would be to say, we'll do it, but there is a cost, and here's the actual penalty that you'll pay in performance, or maybe
an increased support charge, right?
Yeah, something
a nominal support charge,
or something like an extended support contract.
Agreed, Jeff. Right? Yeah, a few $1,000s a year to cover our costs because we had to backport this fix, right? Like whatever.
Yeah,
something reasonable. Ripping out your firewall is not reasonable.
On the other hand,
the hard line. They took the hard line and said, no, you need to upgrade. Damn it.
I mean, who knows? I mean, how long do you give customers to upgrade? 5 years, 10 years? Like, I also, in some respects, sympathize with the vendor as well.
Well, as an extension to that, Paul, it's pretty rare that any vendor of any major, network device operating system is just going to go, I think we need to retire that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Microsoft publishes a list. You can look at every single operating system.
You typically get like a year of
station.
Yeah.
No, it's like
over a year, right?
Yeah, it's like a decade. I mean, they've got, there's a whole chart. I have to look it up all the time to try to tell my customers, you've known about this for 5 years.
Yeah.
I understand it's a capital investment. It takes a long time and a lot of money to replace things across, think of a retail location that's got retail, nationwide. Not saying they're my customer, but think of like a Target or something like that. I get that, but you've got years to plan for it. But so there is no. I have little sympathy except for, if you're going to make a business decision, the things going into life, into service in 3 years, we're going to, pay the extended service fee and nurse it along for another 5 to 7 years. I mean, the point of sale vendors, retailers, they want to keep, and it makes sense from one perspective. If it works, why replace it? It's a computer that's running my cash register. It's a point of sale system. Why should I be replacing it, upgrading it? It's a price of doing business in our connected technological world. Anyway,
SonicWall has an interesting market share too, because you tend to see a lot of SonicWall in ICS and OT environments for some reason.
More environments where they don't want to rip out and replace stuff on a regular basis. They just want to
have stuff
that works and let it go.
Smaller environments too, right? It's not an enterprise with 100,000 users, right? Like I've got 3 sites, and each of those 3 sites have 10 systems or whatever, right?
Yeah, very highly distributed, small operation market. Yeah.
Jeff, I had two stories in there. One, and we can cover this at a later date because I did not read these stories, and I'm happy to defer that to a future show, where maybe we just dedicate a segment of the segment to talking about, one, how does TLS work, and two, the elegant maths, plural, behind the RSA encryption. I don't know if you had a chance to digest those. They are not easy to digest.
No, that's not something that we would begin to do justice to in the waning movements of our news segment.
I think we table that for a future. Maybe we give ourselves a week or two to collectively.
Even the next time we need to fill a spot and we're looking for a technical segment, let's just dedicate it to a discussion of how does TLS work and why is it a big deal? Why is it not a big deal? On your perspective.
My take on that is, like, if we Black Hat's coming up, for example, if we did a person on the street interview and shoved a microphone in random people's faces walking around Black Hat and DEF CON, who largely are seasoned, highly technical security professionals, and said, describe to me how TLS and or SSL and or RSA or even Diffie-Hellman works, right? Like, you'd get a wide variety of answers, right?
Yeah,
I'm not saying everyone would be wrong. Everyone would have their different take as to high level to how much detail they can go in. But I think the further detail you go in, the smaller that crowd gets, right? They can really explain
and unless they
level.
sat recently for their CISSP exam, they're probably not going to be very accurate.
I think it was Dimitri who was in studio last week that was like, yeah, that's a lot of that stuff is like you study for the test and then you forget, right? Because you don't necessarily have to apply that in a large percentage of our daily, work environments.
I do think asymmetric, like public-private key, is kind of a fun topic to talk about. I mean, and it would be a nice. I'm not volunteering because I got things to do
volunteer because it requires research. Is what you're saying, Jeff, right?
It does. It would be a nice topic, though. I mean, RSA in very you can say it in a sentence. I mean, RSA. Public-private cryptography depends on exponentiation of prime numbers.
Yes,
and the fact
prime
that
numbers.
You cannot reverse that mathematical equation quickly. That's the fundamental of RSA. It really is. But
in the fundamental, the way I described RSA, exactly that to the intern.
It's factoring.
It's factoring prime numbers, right?
Yeah.
But I described Diffie-Hellman as basically a splitting of the key into two pieces, public and private, right?
There you go.
Yeah, and that's a good high-level definition, but I strongly recommend that every security professional listen to or read the book Crypto by Steve Levy that goes into the history behind it, the people behind it, gets into what they were experiencing when they were discovering these algorithms. Doesn't get too deep into the math behind it. But when I was listening to that book, I was like, oh, they're talking about these papers that Diffie-Hellman and Merkle, people forget about Merkle, right, wrote back in the day. And I'm like, what? I'm curious what's in these papers. And you get past the first paragraph and I'm like, holy crap, that's a lot of mathematical formulas that I have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right? It gets deep really fast.
Well, you need to study some linear algebra and group theory and everything else. But I got a degree in this stuff, strangely enough. Anyway,
so I nominate you and Jeff. I nominate the whole team, the whole team to have this discussion. It's going to be a team.
We all got to bring it to the table.
Yeah.
I would have to go back and read up. I still have my cryptography book, which has got all the details in it. But elliptic curve I find fascinating is still to this day, and it's finally starting to be adopted. But the cost savings computationally of elliptic curve versus RSA, basically it's a mathematical reduction. It's additive instead of exponentiation.
Yep.
And the computational cost savings are massive, and I would even go as far to say as if it wasn't for elliptic curve, we would really have a significant problem with miniaturization of devices today. But the fact that elliptic curve exists is a huge.
That was RSA's problem in the beginning that the book talks about, Joff, is the computational resources to do that factoring of prime numbers was the limiting factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I mean, it's a real deal.
We all experience the impact of the impact of encryption and the load on it. If you do any kind of in-person shopping at a brick and mortar with a credit card, and you now have a chip card, how much longer do you have to wait to complete the transaction these days versus a few years ago when it was just swipe and be on your way because the authorization
and swipe in plain text.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was plain text transmission versus we gotta stop and do a
we
key
gotta power
exchange.
up a chip and then do some cryptography. Yeah.
Yep.
It's amazing how it affects our everyday lives, and digging into the details gets very quickly into a lot of math, right? A lot of complex
man, we're gonna have to do something.
We do.
All right. I'll think about it. I'll contact Jeff.
Also, like I think also key validation is kind of an interesting thing when we think about the difference between PGP and the RSA algorithm, right? And how they're validating the public key, which is super important, right? In PGP, raise your hand if you've been to a PGP key signing party. Right, that was the way we validated PGP keys, right? Back in the day, that's how we validated PGP keys. In the RSA algorithm, we have certificate authorities that help us with that, and that was interesting to kind of reflect on that now and in how that's played out. I think it's really fascinating. Okay, so future episodes. I think we're all in agreement. We're going to dig into that. I did want to talk about a really funny story. And it was someone actually disclosed a vulnerability in a backdoor. And basically, the vulnerability is if you connect to the backdoor Win32 IRC bot that listens on TCP port 6777, that you can execute commands. And there is no authentication. The only requirement is commands must be wrapped in quotes or it will fail. As I quote from the description. I'm like, is that a bug or is that a feature? I don't know.
I think it's a feature.
It's a feature, right? They made it easy to execute commands, which I thought was pretty. My nomination for awesome disclosure of the week was my story number 6.
We call that a morale boost.
That's right.
Absolutely.
We call that
something lightweight,
vintage retro
retro morale boost. Yeah.
Also on the subject, we haven't talked about. Let's talk about 15 because that's way more interesting. Security implications of misconfigurations. This was a post from Cisco Talus Group, and they went through these scenarios when they were analyzing just DNS traffic and telemetry. They were able to identify domains that weren't registered but receiving traffic, like with their visibility into DNS. Like you need a lot of passive sensors and infrastructure to do that. Once you build up to that point, you can go like, hey, no one owns this domain, but it's getting some traffic. And then you can register that domain and go like, what is that traffic? So in one case, you can
do that the opposite way though too, right? Like we actually look for old domains that they stopped registering, or if they rebranded or were acquired.
Yes.
We would look for those domains because traffic, like you said, in this one, traffic ends up coming to you if you can register those.
The first case I think was the most interesting, Tyler, to your point, right? There was a domain that had expired, but it had expired because there was like a triple acquisition merger that had happened, right? Like the original company got acquired, and then that company that acquired them had gotten acquired, and then they let like one of the original domains from the company, the first company that had been acquired, they let it expire. And there was still requests from clients requesting wpad.dat, which, as we know, allows you to say the proxy servers that you're allowed to use. And then you could, if you were an attacker to register that domain, you could inspect all of the traffic that was being transmitted.
WPAD, man. WPAD needs to be retired right now.
Right? And this was all just from DNS. And Talus was like, we went to the company and we got it fixed. Like, props to them. That's pretty cool. They also found a typo squatting domain, speaking of the problem we were talking about earlier, that was having requests to VPN connections from that company, right? Like, they basically typo squatted a domain, and got VPN connections to that one. And then the other one was a typo in the MX server record.
Interesting.
So like it was like, like relay.example.com, but someone forgot the dot. So it ended up being relayexample.com. Well, then all I have to do is register relayexample.com, and lo and behold, I control your email. And I think that comes down to the title.
Go wrong?
Yeah,
with or without a homoglyph.
The security implications of but those misconfigurations in DNS, I found in my experience super hard to detect. Like when we think of misconfiguration, we think of like, oh, I misconfigured an FTP service or an AWS server, or like misconfigurations in DNS are hard to spot.
Well, and not even just misconfiguration.
It's a thing that I do once in a while. I will literally just traffic dump, TCP dump or Wireshark, whatever, my DNS traffic and just watch for a while.
Yeah.
Because these things happen even in well-run networks by people who know better.
Well, right? It's not even misconfigurations, right, Jeff? It's things that have been legacied or expired, like printers. Printers are a great example. When a printer goes away, you sit on an airplane and do packet sniffing for any given time, you'll see all kinds of printer requests. Printers are super
on
a network. Like there's printers that are legacied and the DNS records don't go away.
Hey, everybody got a really drink, and then there is the Bonjour protocol.
Oh my God.
Ready?
Yeah. Cheers.
It does segue into Bonjour, broadcast traffic, multicast traffic. I think HC Moore at Rumble is doing a great job in taking advantage of those protocols to do discovery. A lot of that's, Rumble kind of based. And I mean, it goes back to Carlos Perez. But I'm like, dude.
What was the other webcast we just did or that we looked at on ESW that was doing something very similar? Wasn't it Qualys? That is looking at that layer 2 and 3 traffic and just sniffing to find fingerprints.
Yeah.
It's actually astounding. If you're on an on-site engagement, and I've done this before, and you've got access to the network, just to sit there with a sniffer for a while, just watch.
Yeah, I agree, Josh.
I mean, it's just watch what's going on. It's like you can learn so much about how poorly or not that environment's configured. You might find router announcements. It's like, oh, look.
There's even tools that visualize that, right?
The network.
It's unbelievable broadcast and multicast traffic, how that's still just amazing in understanding what's happening on the network and how much stuff people have forgotten about because so many of these devices, just legacy or not, implement these protocols and announce themselves.
I can't wait to see IPv6 implications of this long term.
Oh, baby. IPv6 is all multicast.
We obviously do a lot of, AV. We have a lot of AV gear, and I noticed that certain AV gear will give you an iOS app, and in the iOS app, it'll be like, "Hey, here are all of your mixing boards that are connected to your network." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, how the hell did you know what those?" Like, they give me a list, like, "Hey, at this IP address, you have this model mixing board." I'm like, "Wait."
Well, I've done nothing but Roku's and stuff, right? Like Roku's and Chromecast,
I've done nothing but start up the app, and all of a sudden you know what's on my network.
Multicast away.
And to your point, Joff, I fire up a sniffer, and I'm like, oh, all I need to do is send this packet to the broadcast address of my network, and all my mixers respond. To your point, Tyler, Roku's work. A lot of this shit works the same way. It just announces itself on the network. It's amazing.
Do you know what? In the world of IPv6, there is no broadcast.
Yes. Is that a security? Is that one of the security enhancements? It introduces security, not enhancements, but yeah.
I would call it a security enhancement. But at the same time, some of the additional multicast protocols that have been introduced, actually are
even worse than the broadcast.
Less than enhancements.
Right.
In the security sense. So it sort of cuts both ways.
Yep. I mean, I noticed that. I mean, you guys probably run Ubiquity. I know, Tyler, you do, right? Because we collaborate in a lot of Ubiquity stuff all the time. And you can turn off like multicast and broadcast on your Wi-Fi, but when you do that, it breaks a ton of IoT shit.
Oh yeah, break a bunch of stuff.
It breaks everything.
I had to turn it off because it would just break. It would break too much. It would break the initial discovery, right?
I was trying to do it in like VLAN segments for like guest segments of like SSIDs, and like that was a nightmare.
Yeah. I did one more story I want to cover quickly is my story number 12, how to test WordPress plugin performance and security. What I thought was cool from this article, it talks about a lot of stuff that most of us already know. If you have WordPress and you're looking to gain more visibility, go read the full article. If you're slightly more advanced, skip to the section that was new to me, that in Chrome's built-in dev tools, it shows you how to use the like inspect feature to report on unused CSS and JavaScript files on your website.
That's actually kind of cool.
That was cool. Like, I was wondering, what are the security implications and or attack vectors here? Like, I ran it against a couple of sites and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, there's a JavaScript file that Chrome is telling me is unused. Is that just a performance thing, or is that could I abuse that for some security purposes?
I think you could have to chain something together, like if maybe they orphaned a domain and you could register that, or if you've got a local file upload and you can point to that missing JavaScript, like
that's a good
part of like a file inclusion path.
Hold on, Tyler, go back. I'm including JavaScript this would tell you that it's not used, but if the domain it's loading the JavaScript from is orphaned, I control that domain. Holy crap, if I can inject JavaScript from there, now I can inject JavaScript into every browser that visits your website.
Yeah,
winning.
so
That's a win.
It is potentially an interesting topic in the JavaScript heavy frameworks on the front end of the browser, things like React and Angular and so forth, where, and I've used this as a testing technique, where you actually modify a JavaScript function with an interception proxy coming back, and you tell the application, go into debugging mode instead of being in production mode.
Right.
Angular is a good example. And then you can actually view a lot more about the objects. It actually builds debugging tree information, all kinds of interesting things. There's material there. And in the modern frameworks, if you're a web app person, in these modern JavaScript frameworks, you're going to spend, I can tell you right now, a heck of a lot of time in the developer console in the browser, because that's where the action is.
Oh,
frankly.
Totally agree.
That's where it's happening.
And I love the feature in Burp Suite. There's two little checkboxes that are my favorite features in the intercept proxy. And one is show me all hidden fields and highlight them. And the other is remove all JavaScript that's doing field level validation. Like, that's like it's just so...
It's beautiful.
It lets me put whatever data I want in the application to send back to the server. I'm like, well, that's where it's at, right? That's where I think a lot of dynamic scanners have a tough time, because you need a human to go look at that stuff in a browser and go, well, what if I send it this versus... basically you're transitioning from like just automated fuzzing to a human going, what if I put this value in, right?
And you're still doing API fuzzing basically on the back end, but
then you send it to repeater or intrude. It's awesome.
And just
have like X factor creativity.
It's just that's how I got a vaccine stuff. That's friend Bob tells me that's how I got a vaccine.
Hey, so it feels like we're out of stories.
I agree. We are out of stories. Thank you, everyone, for coming on the show this evening. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. Thank you for the meat scented candles, too. Over and out.